Welcome to the Bardic Inspiration Podcast. I'm your host, Brad the Bard, and today it brings me great pleasure to have on the Birdman, Jaime Soto. He's a falconer and birdman extraordinaire. So, and a giant shout out to the sponsor today, Vedinian, on Patreon. If you guys like horror, mystery, and thriller literature, he is an awesome fiction writer. Check out his website, link in the description. What's up, man?
How's it going? How you doing today?
Dude, I'm really good. It's super hot. I love that we're outside. This is the second podcast I've shot outside.
Really?
And I like it. Like, I like the...
It's, one thing I've always liked about my work is that it puts me outside.
Yeah.
And it's way better to be outdoors and kind of in nature, if you would.
I can definitely agree with that. I can't tell you how many times I used to work an IT job, and just being behind the cubicle made you want to kill yourself.
Oh,
you know?
dude, it's miserable.
It is, especially if you're an extroverted person. You're like, oh, no one wants to talk about anything interesting. This is going to be a great day.
I've had a weird career path, but I used to work at a dollar store to kind of make ends meet, and then I started working overnights in a freezer warehouse, so the amount of daylight I used to see was very limited for a long time there. And like most times it would be just like the only time I saw daylight was going out with the birds, so it always had I'd work 12 hours overnight in a freezer warehouse, be 8 hours during the day either sleeping or going out to hawk real quick. I don't think that math adds up to 24 hours, but whatever.
Yeah.
That's days.
Super interesting. So you actually were doing an apprenticeship while you were working these other jobs to be a falconer?
Yeah, so the way it works in the United States is you get your license. So I take a test through my state. So I'm from New York State. I take a New York State falconer's license test. When I assumably pass the test, I'm not yet a licensed falconer. I still have to go forward, find someone to sponsor my apprenticeship. I have to build the facility, the muse that will house the bird that I plan to work with, and I also have to get all the equipment to, secure the bird and things of that nature. And all of that gets checked by the government before I can even go forward and be considered like a licensed falconer.
That's interesting that the government has its hands so deep in
Oh,
it.
yeah. I mean, it's completely regulated. These birds are protected under what's called the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So basically, if you wanted to own, let's say, a hawk, there's no way to own it like a pet. It's either you're licensed to have that or you just can't have it. And that extends to pieces of the animal as well. So if you find a hawk feather, legally you're not allowed to have that hawk feather. You could be like, I was just walking through the woods and I found it on the ground. Legally you're not allowed any part of it. So if it's the hawk, the hawk feathers, skeletal remains of the bird, anything like that is illegal to have if you're not licensed.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What do they...
So how do they regulate that?
What I'm saying is, if a park ranger sees me with a hawk feather, what's he going to do?
So I always explain, you have to have someone have a really bad day to pull you over and see your dream catcher, window painting, and be like, what type of feather? Oh, that's a turkey feather? You're not allowed to have that. I mean, you're talking about people who are illegally trapping things, and of course, if owning the feather itself is illegal, yes. If there's someone having a bad enough day and they want to write you a ticket, you can get one. But, I think one would assume you'd have to have someone on a really bad day to give you a citation for having just a feather. They're really trying to limit people from thinking that going out and taking birds from the wild is okay, because it's obviously not.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So let me ask you this: how do you obtain a bird? How do they catch these birds of prey, man?
So it's really cool. There's a bunch of different types of trapping methods, if you would. One of the simplest things that you kind of learn from the very beginning, because you could make it out of a lot of homemade things, like a do-it-yourself thing, is something called a balusatry. It's a BC for short. It's funny, I should have grabbed one. We could have showcased what it was.
You can probably grab it later.
But essentially, if you would imagine just a dome-shaped meshing of fence, or fencing, if you would. And essentially what happens is you take your bait animals, like a mouse, and it's an enclosed dome, so the mouse goes inside, but it's like a fencing, so you could see through. You could see that there's a mouse running around.
And the mouse can't get out.
Mouse can't get out. Nothing
so
can get in.
It's not like chicken wire. It's more densely tight.
Yeah, it's if you ever seen 1 centimeter fencing, the little square mesh. Yeah, just like that. That kind of
like mesh that you put over your windows.
Yeah, just not so pliable. It's more stiff and can take shape, basically. So you make this dome shape, and then on top of it you would put clover nooses. So there's these special nooses that essentially when the bird comes down, it sees, you know, this mouse kind of moving about on the ground, quote unquote. It doesn't really perceive that it's within an enclosed object, if you would. The hawk comes down, feet extended like it would to grab the mouse, and it contacts basically the framing of the trap. And then it goes to pull away, and when you have the clover nooses atop, what happens is, you know, the noose is there, the foot comes down, tries to grab it, can't. When it pulls away, the noose snares.
Nice.
Yeah. So with a trap like that, you know, for us, it's illegal to basically leave that trap just out, because what ends up happening is if the bird does get snared on the trap and no one's there to take the bird off the trap, it can die. You know, basically that's the worst, you know, thing that could happen. There's not too many other better things. It could break legs too. So a trap like that is very common. It's kind of like a drive-around trap. You throw it in the back seat of your car, you drive around, and if you see like a hawk on a telephone pole overlooking like an open field, generally they're scanning for food. So you like throw the balusatri out, you'll drive 2 seconds, you know, further down, and you kind of just wait, and you like bait the bird.
And the thing has the mouse in it.
Yeah, essentially. So it's you know, when I made mine at home, what I did was I took the ring of a bike tire. So, you know, like a normal pedal bike, you know, you have that metal ring that the inner tube sits on. I used that as the base, and then I basically took metal fencing and framed like a dome around that. So you imagine maybe not 24 inches, probably like an 18-inch diameter, and then just like 6-inch rise of dome meshing on top, fully enclosed with a little like square door pocket on the bottom. Open it up, throw the mouse in, close it, and then there was just weight to it basically as it was, and then I had all the clover nooses, and then drive around. You know, if you see a hawk, throw it out, and then again you kind of like walk away, you move away from the trap. If the bird is hungry enough, if the bird's really scanning, generally it's like you throw it out, you go away, and the bird just comes right down. That's one style. There are other styles. One thing that Tom actually took me up to, there's a mountain range near us, and what he set up was mist nets. So the way a mist net works is it's a large wall essentially of netting. So if you can imagine, we made this U-shaped perimeter. The netting stood about 8 foot tall. So it's like an 8 foot tall netting over an 8 foot run, let's say, but it's not one solid piece of mesh. It's got like a section every 2 feet, if you would. So instead of being just a solid wall of netting in which the bird would hit it and then kind of like bounce out of it, it's got, you know, 8 foot tall, 2 foot panels. So the netting kind of sits every 2 feet, if I'm drawing it out right.
It kind of makes sense.
So, you know, so like you have like an entire 8 foot by 8 foot square, but every 2 foot horizontal run there's just like a pocket of netting. So instead of being one solid wall, so what we do is we set up this U-shaped perimeter basically on the top of a mountain or a ridge line. So as these birds migrate over, you know, they're looking for food, they're migrating, we're sitting there, we have that U-shaped perimeter of netting set up. We essentially have a bait pigeon in the middle, and then we have essentially like a string that's tied to it. So now the pigeon itself can't get access because there's a bunch of netting around it. What happens is the hawk, the eagle, the falcon, whatever is, you know, progressing through the area, sees it, it stoops in. Since the netting is static and stagnant, not moving, it doesn't perceive it as it would, you know, the moving pigeon, if you would. So as it comes in, it doesn't perceive the netting, and because of the way the net is set with those different panelings, it hits it, and bird, instead of again hitting the netting and kind of bouncing and ricocheting off, it hits and it kind of falls into the netting. But same idea.
And it's hard for it to get out because there's so many layers.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the idea of the kind of pocketing, is since it's got like a paneling, let's say every 2 feet, as it hits that netting, it doesn't just hit and kind of fall out. It hits and kind of sinks into almost like a recess in that panel. And it's the same idea with that style of trap. You know, we can't just leave it there. That one specifically is obviously with the fact that we have to kind of draw in the bird. We have to be actively there anyway. But it's, you know, again, a trap you can't just leave and like let.
So like, do the birds give a shit that you are like visible, or do you kind of hide?
We do hide. So there would be like a rock blind set up. And you know, if the bird is coming in, you know, like Tommy would be there and he'd be like, Jim, like, stay down, don't move, and you sit there real slow, and you like tow the string of so the pigeon has like a harness on, and there's a string attached to it, so it kind of makes the pigeon kind of dance around in its little protected case that it's in. But if you know you're standing, we're only like 10 feet away from this whole setup, if you would. So if you're standing there waving your hands or making yourself kind of very known, the bird's not going to be comfortable to go in for that, you know, kill, if you would. So the goal is, kind of stay very quiet, very still. You see the birds coming in, you can bait them, and you'll generally tell, you know, as the bird's coming over in its kind of migratory phase, if it's really interested in what you're, you know, baiting it to, it's going to kind of like look and you're going to see it completely like change the direction it's going for. Some birds, you can tell they're like not even interested. They fly overhead. It's not too much of a guessing game. Like if the bird's kind of really interested, you'll note it very quickly, but they'll always kind of get you every once in a while, because as they come in the last second, if something throws it off, spooks it, if you get excited and you sit up, that bird will toe up real quick and get out of there and won't even, it'll avoid the net. Some birds, I'm sure Tommy has stories of this, they take some of the same migratory routes each year. So some of these birds may have already been trapped, may even be aware of kind of the gimmick that's at hand. They know about, if I stoop down, there's going to be a wall there. They may have been used to it, quote unquote. They don't really have a memory like that, but you do definitely encounter birds that have like experienced it or have witnessed it before.
They have the PTSD.
Yeah, almost get like wise to the game, what's going on.
That's funny. So how long does it take to become a falconer?
So it's kind of like a interesting question. If you are talking in terms of just like formally getting licensed, the test is offered in April or August. So let's say I take the test in April and I'm a really good carpenter and I build my facility right after I pass my test and I know someone right down the street, I can be fully licensed, let's say like in a month. Like I pass the test, I build the facility, I have someone who says, yes, I'll sponsor you, and the government is quick for a change and comes in real quick and checks everything off, then boom, you're a licensed falconer. At that point, you would then have to wait till the trapping season in order to trap a bird, and then you have to wait till the hunting season in order to hunt with that bird. All that being said, it's a very big commitment. Owning an animal, working with an animal, what's going on here on the property is much more extensive than your baseline falconer would be doing. There's a lot of propagation here, a lot of conservation involved in this property, if you would. But even still, if you were just looking to be like let's say a hobbyist falconer where you owned a red tail, you worked with a red tail more so, and you just wanted to hunt each season, basically trap a red tail in migration, hunt with it for the season, release, and then just repeat that process. You can do that, but it's a labor intensive thing, and it's a lot of responsibility. So they don't like people to just, like I said, how quickly can you become a falconer? It's kind of a tricky question. Like literally you can take a test, pass it, and if you're good at building, you can get your licensing very quickly. But what we would advise is, think about the animals you're going to be adversely affecting if you yourself don't know what you're doing. Like
how easy is it to injure a bird when you're trapping
it? It's when trapping it, it's not so easy or hard to injure it. I'm trying to think how to phrase it. Have you ever walked up to a hawk and tried to pick it up?
No.
So like how? So it's a very like you would have to bridge a pretty big gap to get to the point. Like it's the information's out there. So what I'm trying to think how to like articulate this without giving like bad information out to the world. Like obviously there is the possibility for you to learn enough to work with the bird and know what you're doing and not be licensed. We don't want to perpetuate that idea though, because then you have people who like literally will go out and like, oh, this is a cool thing to do, let me go out, and then they get a bird and they're like, I'm done with this after. It's very labor intensive. Any bird that you want to work with and hunt, one thing you're already doing, you're weighing it every single day. Like if you can't even like think about your own regiment with your own body and things like that. Like every day I have to make sure that my bird eats enough so that it maintains enough weight so that the next day it will continue to recycle to do whatever habit or thing I need it to do.
So how do you weigh them?
So literally just utilizing a scale. How
do you like entice them to come get weighed?
So there are a couple different like stylings of scales out there. One that we kind of took from a buddy of ours out in Arizona. It's basically just a flat top refrigerant scale. I believe it's used for weighing like propane tanks and things like that. And it goes all the way down to the 1/10 of a gram, which is something we need because with the birds, some of these birds are very lightweight. And now basically there's not too many like companies that make bird scales rather, so you kind of have to affix a perch to whatever scale you're utilizing. With this specific one that, like I said, we kind of learned about from our buddy out in Arizona, it's a nice flat square scale. It's got like a 1 foot by 1 foot just flat face, so basically all we do is take like turf like this, put it on top. And for the birds that are getting weighed, they're worked, so they're used to like stepping on and off of things. So like I walk the bird over to the scale, I kind of bump its heels, it'll step up onto the scale, and it'll just sit there real quick, and I'll weigh it, and then I'll take it off.
You give it food to get up there, like to entice it?
No. So the food is, the only way to get the bird to react to me, to do things. In getting it to step onto things, that's more of just like a positioning of the body. Like if I start to bump its heels here and the surface, my hand that it's standing on, is starting to pull away, its brain is basically going to say step back because your surface is falling away. So that's not necessarily like a response in terms of like, I want you to do this, like here's food. So that's just like a mechanical thing. Like if I bump its heels on anything, its body says step backwards basically. But in like it going into a tree and coming to me, that's when food comes into play. That's when the weight comes into play. A name, a whistle, all of that's irrelevant. It won't come into play if your bird's up in a tree and Doug, like, hey Doug, come down. Like Doug doesn't care that his name's Doug. If you don't have food, it's game over.
Doug doesn't care that his name's Doug.
People always ask, and it's one of those like bittersweet moments in what I do. It's like, well, what's the name, or like, what did you name it, or how do you come up with your names? And it's like, I don't. Like the bird doesn't care if it has a name. I don't care if the bird has a name. But the reality is there's no even recognition of the name. So they don't have that kind of like that structure in their brain to recognize it. You could loosely associate like whistles with things. So like as I go hawking with birds, I'll sometimes let out a whistle, and it kind of allows the bird to identify like, I know that noise is coming from that thing. So sometimes if a bird kind of veers off or like goes in a different direction and you let out like long drawn out whistles, they'll kind of gravitate back towards you. Or if they've lost sight of you and you let long drawn out whistles, sometimes they'll come back. But that's just more of like a habituation. It's not like a fail-safe. Like if you forget the food at home, don't put your bird in the tree thinking, oh, I'll just whistle and it's going to come right back to you. That does not happen. So like
they'll totally like leave.
They'll dead you. Yeah, they don't care. So it's a very, you got to understand, it's not even like a love-hate relationship. You put all your love and energy into it and they're just apathetic. It's like, do you have the food? That's it. If you want to talk about like the most efficient lifestyle, that's basically what they're doing. They live to eat, sleep, and reproduce, basically. That's all they're here for. So you go out and the bird chases, a squirrel, and it doesn't see you and you can't find it, and then you leave. The bird doesn't necessarily go, oh, where's Jim? The bird will recycle over and be like, I'm a bird of prey. I hunt. I will kill things, and I will do that. So that is one issue that happens with, ownership of birds, and if you're not careful, and exotic species and things like that. If I get some crazy exotic eagle from Africa, does it normally live in New York? No. Could it survive? Very well, potentially, yes. And then could it do a lot of damage? I mean, yeah, you have a freaking African eagle flying around New York just taking whatever it wants. And so people always ask, like if a bird gets away or something like that, one, does it look for you? Or two, like what happens to it? One, they don't necessarily look for you. I have had birds that like gotten off on me. I remember one specifically, it was found in an area where I used to fly it. And so in like my looking all over my town for this bird, I assume that in the bird flying around probably saw the field and was like, I recognize this field, and just kind of hung out there. And then like a day or two later, I got a call from a guy and he was like, hey, you're that kid who flies a bird in the reservoir, right? And I was like, yeah, I am that guy. And he was like, hey, I'm over here and this bird is harassing me. And I was like,
it's harassing me.
What
was it doing? Like,
it wasn't really harassed. So it's an imprint bird, so it was sitting in a tree and basically
at him.
Well, no. So what the imprint does is it views you as a bird. So it was calling to him like, "Give me food." So essentially, he was going ka-chup, 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 and the guy's like sitting there on the ground, like looking at this bird, and he's like, "It's very unusual that a bird would be talking to me, like And it's a like a streak white bird, so it didn't look like it really belonged there to begin with.
Can you kind of describe what you mean by imprinting?
Yeah. So when the bird hatches out, unlike some animals where, the second the animal hatches out, it opens its eyes, what's in front of its mom and dad. With birds of prey, it doesn't happen instantaneously from the hatch. So the bird hatches out, and at about 6 to 7 days old, the brain starts to release chemicals which essentially associate, itself with what it perceives itself to be. So as I explained to the groups, the bird imprints no matter what. So every bird will imprint on something. In our vernacular, when I say like the bird was imprinted, what I'm implying is that the bird was imprinted on humans. So what that means is at the point where the bird will start to imprint on something, it was left exclusively with people. So now that doesn't mean necessarily like Jim, like the owl we were looking at before, Boogie, it's past tense, future tense. Boogie, I was the one who had the chance to formally imprint him, but he's not imprinted on Jim. He basically just is imprinted on people. So what he perceives as other, Eurasian eagle owls is people, essentially. So when I say, a bird's imprinted, in my vernacular, in a falconer's vernacular, you're implying that it was imprinted on people. That being said, any bird that's hatched out will imprint on something. So, like a bird that's what we call like a wild bird or a natural raised bird, parent reared bird, it's still technically imprinted. It's just imprinted on its parents. So, an owl that's imprinted on its parents perceives itself as an owl, perceives other owls as owls. An owl that's imprinted on people will perceive people as other owls, quote unquote, and will perceive other owls as just other entities, things it doesn't really understand or comprehend.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe you don't even know this, but don't blue jays do that? Or there's some bird that goes in, it'll fuck up the nest of another bird and lay its eggs so that bird takes care of it?
There's a couple different bird species, and you're throwing me under the bus because I can't remember all of them.
You're a birds of prey guy, not a birds of sabotage guy, and no one's holding you to that.
That is, it's funny too, because I was literally just talking to a group on Sunday about this, where there are birds where their nesting habit is to not make their own nest and lay an egg in there. It's to basically parasite off of someone else's nest. They'll lay their egg. I want to say mockingbirds, but I don't think that's true. And since this is a bird talk, let's not quote me on that. But basically what they'll do is they'll lay their egg in another bird's nest, so that they basically, all they have to do is propagate. They've left their lineage in someone else's nest, and they could go live and do their own and have their fun. Someone else is responsible for raising their young, essentially.
But then does that baby egg from the saboteur imprint itself and think it's the species of the parent?
So it doesn't always.
It depends on the species.
Well, I would say it doesn't always get so specific to species. So, for example, if I take if we have imprint, like a good imprint female gerfalcon, right? She's good. She's laid eggs for us. She's raised young before. And I have a couple, let's say, baby sacred falcons that I don't want to leave with people because I don't want them imprinting on people. I want them parent reared, quote unquote. I can leave them with her. We've had.
What are the benefits of that, though? Why would you want it to not imprint on people?
So you can't regress back from the imprinting. Once a bird has been imprinted, it's imprinted for life. So let's say you have a bird and you hunt with it, and you hunt with it for 7 years, and now it's older and you want to retire it from hunting, quote unquote, and you want it to be a breeding bird. If it's an imprinted bird, the only way to do that is with you middlemaning what it needs, because an imprinted bird would not mate with another imprinted bird, so it doesn't, it's like two male plugs or two female plugs. I don't know if that's allowed to be said in this day and age, but the idea is basically with a parent reared bird, you have the option of still flying it. Yes, a parent reared bird can do everything an imprint bird can, so it's not that you have to imprint the bird to be able to work with it. We can literally, go out in September, take a bird right from the wild and hunt with it and work with it. I don't need to raise it and rear it, in front of me for it to work with me and do things like that. But if you imprint the bird, you no longer have the option of down the road putting it with another bird for the purpose of copulation.
That species.
Or anything.
Yeah.
So with imprints, for example, like I was saying, if we have an imprint female gerfalcon, it does not mean that she can't reproduce for us. What it means is at some point she's going to be in heat, essentially. She's going to start talking to us, and then she's going to start laying eggs. They're going to be infertile eggs because nothing's copulating with her. But us being falconers and, talking with her, and then also having imprint males, we can go into the chambers with the imprint males, get semen from them, and then artificially inseminate the female, and then those eggs that she's producing will then be fertile. And so then the process of that is, once the egg hatches, what do you want to do with the lineage? Do you want to continue to raise imprints? Do you want to have an imprint female? Do you want them to be all parent reared, so you'd leave them with the parent so they get raised up for potential for breeding down the road? It kind of really depends what you're planning to do with the bird, with what you do in terms of rearing and things of that nature.
Interesting. Birds, man.
Birds.
So, like, what's your favorite species of bird to work with?
So it's probably not a crowd favorite, but I personally like vultures the best. So, you know, of all the cool birds that we work with, all the birds that like hunt and kill things really fast, vultures are completely scavengers. You know, they don't like hunt. They have a much more, I should say, developed like social nature compared to these other birds of prey. They still wouldn't really like tolerate being with each other, if you would. You know, all our birds are kind of kept isolated and alone.
Yeah.
If you put one next to another, they would go for each other, attack each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there's no you know, even with the Harris hawks, so like Harris hawks are birds that are known to work together and hunt together actively in the wild, but down to weight they can you know, i.e. hungry and, you know, eager to kill things, they can still be aggressive towards one another. So anytime you have a bird down to weight, or literally any bird we have, we keep them separated, we keep them isolated with no chance to get to one another, because they're apex predators, so nothing's hunting them essentially, but that doesn't mean they won't have an issue killing one another. You know, so they're not necessarily on each other's food chains, but they know they're each capable of killing one another, so you got to be well aware of that. You can't, you know, if I had like a bird...
You had the two owls over here in the same hooch, though.
So that's like a natural pair that are breeding together. So,
okay.
You know, if you have like a breeding pair in that sense, but like if I had just, you know, a nice red-tailed hawk, right, the small male, let's say, and I put him just out here in the middle of the lawn, yes, he's like a, you know, big bad hawk. That won't stop something from coming in and killing him. Like if I give him a little piece of food, like let's say I give him like a nice quail breast, and he's sitting there eating this quail breast, and a bald eagle, or let's say a golden eagle, we really wouldn't have had that happening around here, but let's just say like a bigger, badder red tail flew into the area and sees him just casually sitting there eating, that red tail in the wild would have no issue just coming in, you know, striking at my red tail to get the food or anything of that nature. So it's kind of like the same situation. Like if I had a bird inside tethered on a perch just hanging out, and I brought another bird through the room and the bird, you know, jumped off my fist or something happened and it got away from me, you know, there's nothing to say that that bird wouldn't turn around and go for the other bird. Like, is it its normal diet? You know, the falcon sitting here, would the owl normally go for that falcon? No, but when they're in the proximity and their kind of personal realms are overlapping, you know, there's nothing to stop that aggression, if you would. Yeah,
that's interesting. So how do you get them to behave that they'll chill on your wrist and like not be like, oh my God, there's a person that might be able to hurt me, and that's what's holding me right now? How do you build the trust? Like, is there something like that?
Yeah, so that's literally a process called manning. So when you man a bird, back like, you know, eons ago, if you would. So manning would literally be, I'd have the bird on my fist for like 2 hours, and then I'd have to go do something. So I'd give you the bird, and the bird would literally not be alone for the entirety of, for, you know, 24 hours, 48 hours. It would just consistently be on someone's fist, being manned, essentially being, you know, maintained.
And tied, like it's tethered to the thing?
So yeah, the idea is, you know, like I'll run you through the scenario of, let's say, so I just got my falconer's license, right? I go out in September, I go looking for a bird. I see, you know, a red-tailed hawk in a tree looking over a big open field. I'll throw my BC out. Bird comes down. Okay, cool. I trapped on the trap. I get out of my car. There's a couple different things you can utilize. Generally having like a good casting jacket. So obviously the bird in front of you is going to be completely wild, crazy. You're going to be approaching it. Its feet are going to be bound and stuck, and it's going to have no idea what's going on. So generally come over with a towel first, that you can just throw a towel over the bird. It'll calm it down. At that point, you know, you would reach in, you'd kind of secure the legs, having just good like flat shears, which are what you, like medical shears. So it's basically you can cut your skin without cutting the skin. This way you can cut basically all the noosing off, you know, off of the talons. At which point it's good to kind of, you know, be mindful of the feet, because once you know, cut off all the clover nooses, basically the feet are going to be going crazy. So securing the bird, keeping the towel over. A lot of times what people do is you can kind of get the bird to like clinch to something. If you have like just like a short end stick, you kind of put it to the feet, the bird will like grab the stick, and then you just secure the bird, bring it home, at which point you're going to put...
Would you put it in like a cage and then in your car? Like how? What are you securing it on? Like
so if you have like a casting jacket, which is a jacket that'll like fully... it's the idea of what a towel would be wrapping around, but it has Velcro straps on the front, so it's almost like a straight jacket. Like, yeah, literally. So you'd kind of like ball up the feet. You'd have a hood, essentially, which is, if you've ever... People always call it a helmet. So that little helmet thing that you put on the bird, you'd have a general size hood with you. So all this kind of sounds obscure, and this is the reason we don't have just random people do it. So you'd have like your Falconer sponsor with you trapping your first bird.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are like, I'm saying it casual, like, oh, you'd have your hood and you have this and you have that. A lot of people don't just generally have these things, but the idea is, you'd go in with like a general sized hood, so that when you trap the bird, you secure the feet, you put it in the casting jacket, you put the hood on it. Generally you're with someone, so they're kind of securing the bird. You would drive home, which point you'd have anklets made up and jesses made up. So the idea is anklets would strap around the anklets, and the jesses are the secure that allow you to hold on to the bird, essentially. At which point you have basically a buck wild crazy bird. Like, the bird's not going to want to sit on the fist. It's going to be just kind of doing
Mad
cartwheels
as
on your
hell,
hand.
yeah.
Yep. And that's essentially the beginning stages of the manning phase. You would have weighed the bird before kind of undoing everything, because at that point now you're not going to really be able to weigh a crazy bird. The reason you weigh the bird is because at whatever point it starts eating for you is going to be the weight you want to start working the training around. So the idea is, the bird's completely wild, completely crazy. You can feel its keel, which is basically that ridge bone right here on the front end of the bird. The more developed the muscle around that keel bone, essentially the fat of the bird, you could assume the more recent it's eaten, or just the healthier the hunter it is. So it's like, if you want to think about what an emaciated bird would look like, you're not going to see like necessarily like a skinny bird or a fat bird. You'd have to feel this keel bone right here. The more muscle and fat around the keel bone, the fatter the bird is. The less, the skinnier it is. So when I trap this wild bird, I'll put it on a scale and I'll get, let's say, 900 grams, but I'll also feel that keel. So if that keel is like really thick and hearty with like fat and muscle, I know 900 grams is way too heavy for not like heavy in a bad way, but the bird is going to respond to me because it's eager for food. So if it's super fat at 900 grams, it's not gonna want to take food from me because it's fat and it's healthy. If I put the bird on the scale and it's 900 grams and I feel that keel and it's what we would say is razor sharp, there's like no muscle, that means 900 grams is probably where the bird's brain is going, you need to eat right now. You need to go. And that's probably why it came down to the trap in the first place.
Yeah, it was desperate.
Yeah, it's desperate. So when you start to man the bird, again, in the old days, it used to be you literally had the bird on your fist all the time, and it was on someone else's fist if you had to go somewhere. Now you put it on your fist, hour, 2 hours, hood it if you have to go do something, and then any chance you get, you unhood it, and you basically are offering it food the entire time. And this is just the initial phase. The idea is the bird can be scared enough to just never eat for you to the point where it will die. So you need to put time into the aspect of manning it to get it comfortable enough to eat around you. So that is kind of like you gotta close that gap quickly. So you want to spend as much time positively around the bird, have the bird on the fist, offering it food, staying really calm. If you have to sit in a dark room and sit there quietly for 3 hours and not move so that bird feels comfortable, that's what you do. And eventually the bird gets very kind of acclimated to you and the different stimuluses you'll introduce it to, as well as it didn't eat yet. You took it off the trap. If it's some birds, you talk to falconers, they'll trap a bird in the morning, and by that afternoon, if they've done the right thing and the bird hasn't eaten because it's a bad hunter, the bird will be eating on the fist. That's not always the case. Sometimes you trap a bird and it's like a week later and the bird still has not eaten. It'll sit on the fist kind of calm, but you'll see it's like with most birds, they kind of like look down at the food and they like look up and they like look down, they look up, and they're like waiting for you to do something because they don't know that whole action of putting the head down is a vulnerable thing. So for them to reach forward and like grab food, it puts them at risk, very high risk. So it's very funny. You'll see with every bird that you start to work with, like they look at you, they look at the they look at the food, they look at you, they look at the food. And eventually, in weighing the bird and offering it food and manning it, it gets to the point where like it literally will like put its mouth on the food and like just be looking at you and like, can I do this? Like, am I gonna die? And then it'll like take one bite and it'll like continue to look like I'm still here. Oh, okay. And it'll like take another bite, and then it starts realizing like, okay, I'm okay to eat around this person. Once I get that response from the bird,
what do you feed them?
So to start, we generally feed them chicks, so day-old chicks. It's the easiest thing for the amount of quantity we need. We do cycle the diet though, so mice, rats, quail, and chicks. Mice and rats because there's more bone structure in the body, so there's more calcium to the diet. The quail is just a darker meat, so it's richer and more nutrient in that aspect. And then the reason we feed day-old chicks is when the chicks get culled by the chick hatchery, the yolk sac. So when you eat an egg, you have that yellow sunny side egg up. that yolk
It's
sac,
delicious.
yeah, right, it's so yummy. That yolk sac gets internalized into the chick before the chick hatches. So what ends up happening is when that chick hatches, it still has that nutrient-rich yolk sac inside, which allows for it to, absorb nutrients. The chicks get culled. The chicks that we feed to our raptors get culled before that nutrient-rich yolk sac gets fully absorbed by the chick itself. So when our raptors eat those day-old chicks, frozen thawed, so they're already killed. This is humane situation. They're absorbing all that nutrient-rich yolk sac. So that's the most common thing.
They like that. Like does it taste good to them?
So
like,
it's funny.
that?
I was just gonna say it's actually a little. You can say, how do you know? It's actually a little bitter. So sometimes if you have a bird that you're having a little bit issue eating with, you might want to offer it mice or rats, or a lot of times with like the younger birds, just for the calcium, especially as they're developing their bone structure, we like to give them mice and rats. But there is definitely some type of bitter, not pleasant taste to the yolk or something about the chicks, because you do find, like, if you have a bird that's being sometimes finicky about food or maybe a little sick, staying away from the chicks isn't the worst thing. So there's definitely some type of bitter aspect to that. That being said, a hungry bird will eat if it wants, like a hungry bird will
So
eat.
like they don't have like teeth, right? It's just the beak.
No, so a bird
They
of
just
prey.
swallow that guy whole. Like,
Yeah.
how does that work?
So I always get asked, as I'm like holding a bird on my hand, like, oh, aren't you worried about getting pecked in the face? And so bird of prey is essentially defined by the fact that it utilizes feet to acquire its prey. So no teeth. But the idea is it will utilize its feet to essentially pin things to the ground, and the motion and the tearing of, utilizing the neck to tear muscle and tendons and pull apart and basically make as sizable a piece as possible before swallowing it essentially whole. So there is no like chewing or mastication. When they, so a day-old chick, they'll put their feet down to it, they'll grab a piece, they'll grab this big like piece of chick head, let's say. That's normally the piece that comes off first because it breaks from the neck. When they go to swallow it, their windpipe isn't like ours where it's located down here in their esophagus. It's actually located right near the base of their tongue. So they always say, like, don't talk and chew and you run the risk of choking. Once food essentially passed the gape of their mouth, that little cusp right where their tongue is, it's past the point where they can choke anymore. So like food can kind of like lodge in their throat, quote unquote, but it's not blocking their windpipe to any regard.
Yeah, I've seen like pelicans, like dog stuff, and it's
and
just
like,
chilling here and getting stuck in the neck.
So I mean, pelicans are even more specially adapted to that. But yeah, with the birds of prey, they're evolved and developed and understood that we're not going to be able to chew and rip things to little pellet-sized pieces. That being said, though, when you do have like the mothers raising the young, we'll give the mothers the chick, and the mother will literally like rip off a bite-sized piece of that chick and give it to the young. So they do know proportion size to respective size of bird, if you would. But when it's in their own regard and they're feeding themselves, they rip whatever sizable piece they can. They'll try to swallow it. Sometimes you'll see they'll like not have it orientated properly. They have no hands, so they can't feed it properly to the back of their mouth. So then they'll like shake their head and they'll like try to swallow the food a certain way and spit it back out. Pick it back up and like re-swallow it. So yeah, it gets kind of pretty metal, if you would.
Pretty metal. I would.
Yeah.
I will. Indeed. So yeah, that's epic. What? Yeah, the manning the bird. That's got to be like. So you can't be chilling like watching Netflix.
That's like 100% what you. I mean, so the idea is, the more stimulus you introduce the bird to in like a positive aspect, the better. The more things that'll kind of concrete its calmness on the glove and things of that nature. But there's also the aspect that like certain species, more along like a Scipitor type hawk species, they're very high strung. They can get very worked up very quickly, like a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk. Sharp-shinned hawk is very small. Like if you try to take that thing out into like, again, you want to introduce it to stimulus, but if you just take it into like the middle of a busy park, that thing will literally have a panic attack and die. Like it will just like, it can overheat itself. It can get really, so certain species are a little more prone to, like all of them are going to be nervous and unsure of what's going on around them if it's the first time they're experiencing a person or a dog or anything like that. But smaller ones or species that are more known to be more hyperactive, if you would, can overwork themselves. So something like Netflix and chill with your bird is like not the worst idea in the beginning, because the idea is, above all else, yes, you want to get it used to a lot of different stimulus, but you want to get it used to you first. because you want the bird to
and
start.
what you be doing.
Yeah.
So, like you're regularly watching TV. You want it to be.
I mean,
used
not
to
even just that, but just you want it to get used to you so it can eat.
Yeah.
Because the idea is like whether you're watching TV or not, if the bird's not used to you, it won't eat, and it will literally stand there and starve to death. Like you will literally be offering it food day after day after day, and if you only, like, let's say give it an hour a day, and you pull it out in this cumbersome manner for an hour, and you're just constantly like trying to get the bird, and you're like forcing it to feed, and the bird's just constantly baiting, which is it jumping off and like trying to get away. That's what baiting is. And you're like, oh, and you only do that like 1 hour each day. Like that bird will literally just drop dead before it chooses to eat, because it just doesn't trust you, it doesn't understand, and it's not going to risk eating and dying, like eating and then you like beating it or something like that. So like you gotta like sit there, either be calm with it, like having the TV on. If the TV doesn't bother the bird, cool, like leave the TV on. But the idea is you really want to get it used to you as quick as possible so that it can start eating. At that point, once it starts eating, that's when the game kind of begins. Like, what's your weight? Okay, this is your weight. Then you start noticing the bird has like little quirks at certain weights, or like you go to fly it at 900 grams, and like this is where different stimulus come into play. Like, oh, I fly my bird at 900 grams in my backyard all the time, and it does great. And then I went to a park one day at 900 grams, and the bird saw a dog and wouldn't come out of the tree. And we normally explain it's like the bird can kind of give you like a fake weight, like a false weight. It sounds weird, but the bird can get acclimated enough to you where, yes, in the normal situation of flying through the normal, A to B route, 900 grams, it works fine. It knows it's going to get the food. It plays the game. All of a sudden you switch it up and it's in a different scenario. Now 900 grams is actually a little too heavy. Now it's like, oh, well, the game has changed. I'm actually not that hungry right now, so I'm not going to play the game anymore. So you can get kind of like falsified with, so it's, it's once you get the bird eating for you, that's when it really starts at like, what's the best way to get the bird so like sharp set, as we would say, so eager that like the second it sees game, boom, it goes for it. Or the second I show it food on my fist, boom, it goes for it. There's no delay, no lag, no like, oh, am I really hungry? Like if the bird has to think whether it's hungry or not, quote unquote, then the bird's too heavy, essentially. You need to like drop some weight on it.
So when you take it out on like a hunt, like in like a Subway or whatever, like you want to make sure it's lean. In that situation, it's hungry, it's ready to kill. Yeah,
so I explained it. It's much like an athlete. So like if you had a marathon runner, you wouldn't be able to starve the marathon runner and then also tell him to run the marathon daily, because he would literally just drop dead. So the idea is you find like a very perfect balance, and this is why scales and weighing the bird is so key.
Because you do that daily.
Yeah, so every day with birds that we're working with. So like if the bird is a bird for breeding and it's paired off, they just get fed fat. Like they get fed as much food as they can in a day, each day. So we know they're like heavy and they're fat and they're good on weight. The birds we're working with, where we're monitoring their weight, that's where it's key. Is the idea is we need to feed them, but we also need them to be at a certain number for them to want to respond to us the next day. But if we starve them, they're just going to become malnourished and lethargic and not be able to respond. So you have to find literally that very sweet spot. Certain birds, you have to think about size of a bird. We have American kestrels here in New York and United States. American kestrel could be 100 grams. 10 grams of that. 10 grams is literally nothing. Like 10 grams of that is a tenth of the bird's body weight. It's a significant amount of weight in terms of like a temperament in regards to the weight. You talk about something like a red-tailed hawk. A red-tailed hawk could be 1,600 grams. 10 grams to a red-tailed hawk, it's like one extra crap a day. So knowing the weight in regards to the temperament is something that's big. Some birds, especially if they're small, you may weigh them multiple times a day. Because if you wait for a 100-gram bird to drop 10 grams to see if it's hungry, that may kill the bird. Again, if you just randomly drop the tenth of your weight, like that's kind of significant amount of weight. So with like a small bird like that, we put on the scale in the morning, it's 100 grams. I offer it some food. It looks at me. It's like, nah, I'm not really feeling this. I'll man it for a couple hours. Maybe I'll put it away. I'll let it cool off. And then that night, I'll weigh it again. Even if it's like 98 grams, 2 grams less, that might be the 2 grams that make it go, yeah, I'll take a bite of this right now. Again, with bigger birds, when you're dealing with an eagle that's 8 pounds, then we normally start weighing like in ounces. So 28 grams to an ounce, because if an eagle is 8 pounds, it's about 450 grams is a pound. So that's like the eagle would be something like 3,300 grams, 3,400 grams, 5 grams of that, the eagle is not going to have any type of temperament change. You're really going to have to take notches of weight off, but you still want to do it slow. Again, even if the eagle's 8 pounds, you don't want to wait for it to drop 2 pounds before you start offering it food. You know, that's a quarter of its weight. Like, the bird's going to die. You know, you got to, even big birds, weigh them daily, monitor their temperament in relation to like how they're responding to food and everything. It's you know, the weighing is the big thing.
Yeah. So what's the biggest like bird of prey that you've ever worked with?
So at a worked with, I'll say I handled it. So we had an African crowned eagle here.
How big is that? I don't know.
So have you ever seen? So he was about 5 pounds. He was. I'm trying to think of like something in relation to. I'm like really stumbling as to something to relate it to the size of. You stumped me on that.
like a dog, like
yeah. So I mean, he was a 6 pound. I'm trying to think of like a bird because I'm thinking of like other birds. I'm like, oh, he's like the size of an osprey, but you don't like if you don't know.
Like an ostrich?
No, I said osprey. No, if it was an ostrich, that'd be cool.
I was gonna say,
imagine
that's a big fucking bird. Or what's the peacocks? I've seen peacocks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, imagine like a pelican, just like minus like the big gullet, like something sizable to that. But like so. African crowned eagle, he was a 6 pound male crowned eagle, so the female to male ratio, the females tend to be larger in the bird of prey world, which is not like a normal dimorphism that we see across animals. But the reason I say that was like the biggest, baddest thing I've ever handled or worked with is because like pound for pound, that is literally the strongest eagle in the world. It takes vervet monkey, deer, like it takes sizable game.
I've seen like a video of like some bird of prey like attacking an elk or something.
Yeah,
like trying to get it to fall off a cliff or something.
Yeah, they'll basically grab it and drag it off.
That's fucking crazy.
So you know they adapt methods to hunting things and like you know different ways. Like this eagle, like one of their methods of like hunting is they would go for vervet monkey by basically grabbing at the chest, and what they would do is their talon strength was so strong that as it sunk into the chest of the monkey, essentially it's drawing the breath from it that the chest and you know nothing could suck air back in. It just collapses, and there's so much pressure on the chest at that point that even if you know the piercing of the talons, let's say nothing pierced the lungs or anything like that, the monkey wouldn't even be able to reinflate the lungs. There's just so much downward pressure onto it. So that was probably like, I mean, I have my glove here, so very basic, like you know, short cuff, very thin layered glove. You know, small birds can handle this. An eagle like that would like literally pierce right through this. We had like a triple stitched with like an extra thick hide layer atop of it, and that bird would still like slowly kind of cut. Oh my gosh. Tom Senior was the one who would work with him, and you know he'd be doing talks, and the bird, not even in like an angry way, would just like kind of bite down, and you see him like, and you know like I talk about how you know you could put like the bird's heels to the surface and it kind of steps back. That bird, if it got what we call sticky footed, where it kind of just wanted to hold on, I mean, you would try to chisel it off just to get it to like step off your fist. Yeah, it was a very like it was a sweet bird. Tom Senior raised it very well, so it had a very nice temperament. But boy, man, if that like some of these birds, like if they grabbed you, it'd hurt. If that bird grabbed you, it'd be surgery or reconstruction or something. It'd be bad news.
That's crazy, man. So like. Man, so like, do you emulate that bird with your jiu-jitsu game? Is that why your pressure's so good?
Yeah. Dude, I'll tell you. So like, it's crazy, but one of the things, at least specifically, that I always think about that jiu-jitsu has helped with my bird stuff is in like manipulating and controlling the birds. Not so much like in a bird that's being worked, more with like, you know, when we work with these birds that are like breeding birds and things like that, none of those birds are manned. So like if I walk into a chamber with a bird that's like a breeding pair, they're like, what the hell is this guy? Like they just start going crazy. So, you know, you got to go in there, you got to net them real quick and you got to grab them. But then, you know, there's different times we have to do medical procedures, check wings, apply, you know, antibiotics to different cuts, and like, you know, working with animals, you have to do animal things. Mm-hmm. And I don't know.
Damn, so you're like a diet veterinarian over here too.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't know if it's like in like the manipulation and the body augmentation that I learned in jiu-jitsu. Just now, like anytime I like work with it's so hard to explain, but like as you start to manipulate the birds and they themselves are kind of getting very finicky and like squirming and kind of getting squirrely on you, just in my hands alone I'm like, you know, reverse de la Riva guard, I'm like doing all this like weird stuff, but I'm like actually like orientating the bird, and like you know, not that I'm like the best or most capable bird handler, but whenever I'm holding a bird whatever reason, my mind is always saying, like, have faith in your jiu-jitsu. Like, you have good control of the bird's body. And it's like, you know, even in jiu-jitsu, they always say, like, where the head goes, the body goes. Like, that's like one of the first things.
Yeah.
And so, like, with the birds specifically, I always think that, like, whenever we have to, like, do different shots, or like we're working with a leg or something, I always like affix my hand a certain way, like towards the neck, so that if we have to like kind of orientate their body, it's easier to like direct their body and not have them fight when you direct their head as well. And that's something that like I applied learning it kind of through jiu-jitsu. It's like different ways in having to handle basically crazy and unencumbered birds, like you would like someone who's spastic and on the mats, like you know, like it's kind of like, you know, it doubles over. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah. It's like handling a new white belt.
Yeah, quite literally.
Oh man, that's so funny. So, do you think your temperament from having this job affects your style in jiu-jitsu? I would love to see you in the gi, just like using your toes like they're talons. Like, you ever see those guys that use like the toes to grab the gi and shit? That shit's crazy.
So I mean, it's interesting because like I started doing jiu-jitsu and I was doing the bird thing separately, and I'll never forget, I called up the owner of my gym is BJ Bernard Coletti. Shout out to BJ right now. Thank you for hosting one of the greatest Renzo Gracies out there. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but
yo, all day, man, all the shout outs, bro.
Big shout out to him, because I remember one day I called him up and I was like, hey, BJ, I've been training at your gym for only like 4 months now, but it's the summer and I got a car with birds in it and I can't leave them in there because it's hot. And he was like, what? And I was just like, can I bring them into your academy so I can train my jiu-jitsu? And he was like, what? And I was like, let me just bring them in and I'll explain it to you. And so it's kind of been really interesting in that, like, you know, from that point on, everyone forgot my name from forever now. But B, like, my jiu-jitsu and my bird career lifestyle have always been like almost very intimately like entangled.
Yeah.
Shout out to Will Smith. But no, that's terrible. That's terrible. I'm a horrible person. We have to cut that one out.
GG, well played. Oh my god. No, that's staying in the cut, man.
I have death threats in the mail.
For sure.
Oh my god. You know, he's probably doing so much better than I am, and I'm a fucking. Anyways, piece of shit.
I love Will Smith, but man, that was a good dig, dude.
Dude,
you gotta have a sense of humor about yourself. Man.
Dude, it's fucking. Anyway, what was I saying? So you know, birds and jiu-jitsu kind of like have always gone hand in hand, and it's been really cool because, like I said, you know, BJ let me bring the birds into the academy. But, you know,
like, where'd you put them? Like they in a cage, or like they were just like running around in the scaffolding and shit?
Like, oh, you sit here. No, so what we put hoods are what we put on the bird's head to eliminate their ability to see things.
When they can't see shit, they kind of just don't move.
Yeah, so their primary like sensory is vision. So if they don't see anything, they calm down. They kind of like go neutral. We travel them in something called a giant hood, so it's basically just a box with a perch inside of it. So the idea is, even without a hood on their head, when they're in the giant hood, they're in like an enclosed box basically, so they see nothing. They just see walls.
They don't like react to the sound of BJJ happening though.
Not, believe it or not, not too much.
That's crazy. Because I would think like hearing slams and shit all day, and
you know, it depends on you know, like the type of bird. So if you have like a very crazy unencumbered bird that's like not ever been even in like a giant hood, there could be no noise. You put the bird in there, it can start doing cartwheels and freaking out in the box with no stimulus whatsoever. So just because you've eliminated the stimulus doesn't necessarily mean the bird will be calm anyway. But no, like I've found that like the birds, like, I mean, my gym is a good size, but we're not necessarily like, the birds aren't too far away from the mats. You know, they're pretty much right there. And they don't get bothered. And a lot of times, honestly, when I'm like raising an imprint, which is, you know, at a point where the baby, or rather the baby bird, can't fly, it's in its downy stage, it can't move anywhere, but I want it to imprint on people, the best thing I can do is allow it to socialize with everyone and anything. And there's been many times where I literally like sit the box right next to the mats, and like I'll be training jujitsu.
They can see out of it at all?
It's like a Rubbermaid tub bin, you know, like and for raising an imprint, that's what you'd want, because they sit there. I'll basically like put like a dry bedding underneath that just absorbs fluids for when they crap and stuff. And I'll get a nice piece of AstroTurf. I'll lay it in the box, and I'm basically a bird that doesn't fly in Downy stage. I'll sit it there, and I bring that box with me everywhere. And when I go to jujitsu, like I'll roll, and like I said, it's kind of cool, you know. Not everyone's an animal person. Granted, like these are really cool animals, so there's a little bit more of a draw. But like I know personally, like if I was going to a gym, I may not necessarily want to see an animal there. Like not everyone likes animals that way, but I've actually found, really honestly, with most of the jiu-jitsu community, like everyone's like, dude, that's freaking cool. Like they don't care that it's there. Like we've been having classes where in the background here, like because the bird's freaking out, and people are just like, no, that's bird. Like he does that. Like no one cares, and like it.
That's Doug.
Yeah, like it just happens. Like we've literally had people like come into the academy. Like I'll be in a class like doing something. Our front desk guy Tyler will be there. Like there'll be a bird on the sideline. And you'll see like someone like walk in like planning to like, oh, I'm thinking about doing jiu-jitsu today, like I might sign up for this academy. They like walk in, they see us doing jiu-jitsu, and then they look down, they like see the bird, and they're like, wait, what the fuck is going on right now? And then Tyler walks over and he's like, hey, interested in jiu-jitsu? That's our residential bird. And he just starts going on, like does this whole like sales pitch. So it's funny like how, you know,
I'll bet you that thing's been a selling point more than once. It's like, dude, I want to see that bird more.
I mean, I've like it. If anything, it allows me to bridge a lot of gaps with like people, because like, you know, one, it's a good talking point, but two, people are always like, you know, like I train at this academy down in Northvale. Shout out to Carl Massaro, who I brought like an owl down to his academy once because he loved owls. He said it was really cool. I kind of met up with him last year. A buddy of mine started training down at his academy. Old high school friend of mine. Shout out to Dan Freddy. All these shots. But anyway, my friend started training jiu-jitsu down in Northvale. And he's like, oh, you got to come train with me. So I went down, and that's where I met Carl. Carl found out again that he was like, oh, this is my friend Bird. And Carl's like, why do they call you Bird? I'm like, oh, I work with birds. And he's like, do you have an owl? And I was like, yeah, actually I do. He's like, oh, I would love to. So one day I went down to his academy to train, and I brought an owl with me, and he pooped on the floor, and it was
You were just letting him free roam?
No, I brought him, you know, so more than not, you know, if someone's like, oh, bring a bird, you know, the idea is we're trying to run a business, so I'm not just like, yeah, I'm going to bring birds everywhere. Let's just do that.
Yeah.
But in like the jiu-jitsu world, generally, I'm doing things and then also going to jiu-jitsu in the middle of it, so I kind of have birds with me sometimes to begin with, so I just like, you know, like it's just a point of fact.
Yeah.
But like, no, in this circumstance, like, you know, he was like, hey, if you ever, you know, had the opportunity to bring one, that'd be cool. And just because he was, you know, like opening the gym to me and like being so opening and hospitable, you know, I you know, made a point to kind of go out of my way. But
let me do an open mat or drop-in class for free, and I'll bring the bird kind of thing.
So like it's been cool, but yeah, you know, like I don't generally just kind of bring them everywhere and like, you know, just like, oh, here's my bird, let's fly him around. But he did specifically ask. It was funny too, because I was like, yeah, Carl, I was like, I got him in the car right now, and he's like, can you bring him inside? I was like, he's gonna poop. He's like, you sure? I'm like, dude, they poop like every 4 minutes. And he was like, nah, it's okay. So I bring him in. Like literally, I walk through the front door. I'm standing there, and Carl's like, this is Jim. And then Boogie just shits right on the floor. I'm like, what did I tell you, Carl? And there's this guy that I trained down there with Brian, and every time he tells the story to people, that's the only thing he says. He's like, this is Bird. His bird shitting on my gym floor. Like, there's so many other things we could say about this.
Oh my God, that's so funny. It reminds me, like I was at a friend's house. He has like a homestead with like a bunch of chickens and turkeys and shit running around. And I was holding this one chicken and petting it, and it just shit all over me. It's crazy. Like they don't acknowledge like their butthole. Like, no, they just kind of like it like exploded out. And I'm just like, oh.
So I was gonna say, funny story with that. I was raising this baby chick once, right? And so you know, it's like a little imprint chick that I was raising, a hawk, and I decided to like, you know, just have it on my chest and lay in bed one day. So I'm sitting there like laying down, the chick's like right here, and I was like, oh, this is like such a cute picture. Like I could definitely like, you know, score some tail with this. So I like start like taking pictures, like look at me, my cute chick, and literally like, because it was like my face this way, the chick face this way. The chick like literally just sits up and like mid picture like shits in my mouth.
Yeah,
and you just like it's like picture of like cute chick and Jim, cute pick and Jim, and they're all like this, and it was just, oh my God, dude, it was
perfect.
Disgusting. And I was working at it, so I was working at the fucking freezer warehouse at the time that like that story took place. And I'll never forget because it's like, you know, you're like swiping through your phone and showing people photos and also like dick pic by accident. So this guy's like, oh, show me pictures of that baby bird you were talking about. So I was like, oh yeah, dude. Like, so I started showing him baby pictures of like the baby hawk, and like I swiped one photo too many, and like it was just like, you know, bird jizz all over my face, and he was just like, what the fuck was that, dude? I was like, oh, the bird accidentally shit on my face. He's like, wait, what? And I was like, never mind. He's like, you don't think that's a little weird? And then the guy like stopped talking. But yeah, you know, you get used to it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, so what kind of like, I don't know how intimate your knowledge is on this, but like, what kind of like digestive shit's going on in a bird? Like, don't owls like shit out like the bone structures of animals and stuff?
All the birds of prey will spit out a cast pellet. It's interesting in that owls will do it, but they do not have what's called a crop organ. So with all these other birds of prey, there's a crop organ right here. And so the idea is all the flight muscles for the wings, flight, are located on that keel bone that I was talking about. So I always explain, if you think about it, when you eat a lot of food, you get really swollen and fat. If a bird ate a lot of food and got really swollen and fat in its belly, it would put a lot of pressure essentially to where all the flight muscles were, and it would hinder its ability to fly. So the birds have this crop organ, so when they eat a bunch of food, instead of it passing straight to their stomach and their stomach bloating, it goes to the crop organ first, and the crop organ will bloat. Essentially, it will enlarge. So you have like a skinny neck, if you would, and then by the time they're done eating, it looks like they have like a softball in their neck. And that's all the food they just ate. What that allows for is for them to just basically get up and go. So if they're like eating a rabbit and all of a sudden a wolf comes out of nowhere and it's like, I want this rabbit, they can fly readily away, still have their food, they don't need to worry about anything.
Will they ever like fight like other predators for shit?
100%, yeah. I mean,
what kind of no animals really hunt the birds of prey, right? Like,
no, so like
pumas and shit aren't chilling in the trees waiting for it.
With like apex predators, the idea is, you know, apex predators are the top of the food chain. They can have overlapping dietary needs, and like apex predators can be known to kill other apex predators, but that doesn't necessarily denote them as being a prey species for the other. Mm-hmm. So like a red-tailed hawk can come down or let's say a kestrel kills a sparrow and is eating the sparrow on the ground, and now the red tail comes in to get the sparrow and it kills the kestrel, and it's like, well, fuck it, I got everything, and it'll eat everything, you know. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean that kestrels,
kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. So they are opportunistic, and they also learn skill sets. So like, you can't say that red tails hunt bats, but there are certain clusters of red tails down in, I believe it's Central and South America, where the speciation of red tail in this specific area is right near like a migratory cave dwelling for bats, and so these red tails have just become super acclimated to how to specifically go for bats. And birds, alike, when you hunt with a bird, one of the Harris hawks I hunt with caught a turkey once. She dead to rights knows how to kill turkeys now. There's no question for her. She knows exactly what to do. She's caught maybe 3 or 4 at this point, and she knows each time what to do specifically. And with any species or prey species, that is, you consistently put your bird over it, the bird will learn like the best and most efficient way. I mean, obviously going for the head and driving the hallux snail, which is that back rear large talon, through the skull is like the best way to kill something. But each bird is designed essentially, like falcons have a tooth on their beak essentially so that they can sever the spinal cord, so that as they grab prey, they're essentially designed more to grab prey in the air, immobilize it in the air, and then carry it off to like a cliff face where they can eat it safely. Yeah. Whereas certain birds of prey like hawks have shorter, thicker toes to drive things down to the ground and like deal with it and eat with it on the ground. So everything's kind of designed like differently. Like you look at a bird and you'll kind of know what it wants to go for based on the way it's built and the design of its anatomy, if you would.
Yeah. So falcons, don't they, like the way they kill is that they'll like pummel shit, right? They'll like break the sound barrier or something. I don't know. Like I'm totally going off. I'm going off of like Google, Wikipedia research.
9,000 miles right now. So,
9,000.
So, he was over 9. No.
So fucking space shuttle speeds and shit.
Back to the Future stuff, right?
No, for sure.
So the way the falcon is designed is their wings are designed to allow them to climb very high, not necessarily soar for a long amount of time. You see like eagles and vultures, they open their wings and they just kind of set and they soar. A falcon can do that, but they expend a lot of energy getting to high points. So their kind of goal is to like get to the highest vantage point they can, find what they're going for, tuck everything in. If we look at a falcon when they're kind of all just folded up and sitting there, you'll notice they're almost like a teardrop. They're basically rounded at the top and they come to this like finite point to the bottom. Their wing tips and their tail tip kind of finite to the bottom. So essentially the falcon will make this kind of extenuous will make this climb to the top of, let's say, 800 feet. We'll see a duck rising off of a pond. It's climbing. It's like a bad math problem. Duck rising off of a pond, moving 5 miles per hour forward, 10 feet up every 2 feet for a climb. The falcon will see it, will go nose down. So essentially now the teardrop shape is in its most like aerodynamic shape. So it's round bottom, the tip of the tail and the wing tips will be faced up, and it'll basically start its stoop. So we've actually been able to, not us, TC Management, but the world. There was a falconer who was an avid skydiver, and he was also a falconer. So he essentially trained his peregrine falcon to skydive with him. So they ended up clocking it at about 240 miles per hour. So the fastest land animal, or land air animal, is a peregrine falcon. But the idea is essentially everything's folded up. The bird stoops down. At the last second, the peregrine, let's say we're utilizing a peregrine. The peregrine's moving at even 200 miles per hour. If it contacts anything at 200 miles per hour, it's going to implode. Like it can't sustain that type of impact. So what essentially ends up happening is, as that peregrine falcon stoops down in that teardrop shape, the very last second it flares its wings out, it throws its feet forward, basically like shock absorbers, and it'll grab onto the prey, essentially suck it in. Everything's kind of like moving forward towards the center, and it'll bring its head forward, the falcon's head that is, and it's that prominent hook that we know a beak to have, but inset to that there's another little ridge. It's what's like a tooth essentially. The falcon will lean forward and basically try to essentially notch out the vertebra, the neck of the prey it just went for. So the impact kind of stuns it, whereas the notching out of the vertebra basically makes it immobilized. So even if like consciousness, if the prey regains consciousness, it's irrelevant. The thing's dead to rights at that point. And then at that point the falcon's able to kind of carry it off and move safely.
That is fucking metal. Yo, so, but like I seen videos of like where they just come in and like pummel shit though. And
are you thinking of that one video where it was like, so I saw this one, it was like a migration of ducks or something.
Yeah, maybe.
And it was like the duck was like just sitting there, there,
like
and then all of a sudden it was like wobbly, yeah. And they slowed it down, and it was basically like a falcon came in. So there are certainly like certain falcons that are more inclined to like, we talk about like going for fur or feather. Falcons are generally geared toward going for feather, but you definitely can have certain falcons that are more specifically, or that can be more utilized for ground quarry, or that you can like sacred. I'm thinking specifically sacred falcons. Sacred falcons are something that are kind of commonly utilized to also go for fur as opposed to just feather. So the birds are multifaceted in that. Just because you fly a hawk doesn't mean you can't go for X, Y, or Z. Again, I had a 1.5-pound hawk take almost like a 14-pound turkey. If you give them enough proper stimulus and enough success rates in catching something, nothing will essentially deter them from going for it. If every time I put a falcon over a goose, it failed, nothing in the falcon's brain says, this works, go for it. It'll just not do it. The hawk, it's caught turkey multiple times. So now it's like, hey, you know what that is and you know how to kill it. Just keep doing that and it'll work. So that's how you build the confidence in the bird. Like if I can get, like let's say I had fox near me and it was, appropriate to hunt the fox, what I would do is, let's say I had something that could take fox, like large enough, like a golden eagle. I'd get something that would look remotely like a fox hide, and every time I went to go train with the eagle, assuming we've gotten past the point of it being comfortable with me and et cetera, I would start, introducing what would be called a lure. So it's, again, this would be a situation of hunting fox, for example. It would be a fake lure. I would drag it along. The eagle, let's say, if we're utilizing it, would see it, would say, I'm hungry, goes for this fur hide. Even though the fur hide is fake and it's not real, when the eagle acquires the lure, I give it food. And so now the bird goes, oh, every time I grab one of these, I get food. So then it gets really accustomed to, grab what this thing looks like and I get food. And then one day I'm in the field, and as opposed to having the lure that looks like a fox, a real fox walks. And now the bird doesn't do anything different. It does exactly what it's been doing the past couple of weeks. It goes for the fox. This time it's different. The fox is alive. And
they ever fight back? Like a fox
100%.
A fox seems like a dangerous prey.
I've never hunted for fox, so that was more of a scenario. Let's just understand that. But even something like squirrel, you got to be really quick with getting in on squirrels if your hawk is not very proficient at killing squirrels, because the squirrel is strong enough in its teeth to bite and sever toes, the tendons in the legs. It can get like a high enough bite to numb the foot, like kill the foot, basically deaden the foot completely. So you do have to be careful. Like that's why I was saying with like the turkey killing bird, as I call her, the Harris hawk that likes to go for turkeys. Turkey's kind of a risky game if you hunt it, because turkeys have the spurs on their feet or on their leg, if you would, and they like to kick a lot. So if the bird like just thumps to the body and like the hawk thinks grabbing this thick hide of turkey fat is going to kill it, the turkey's going to turn around and kick that bird, and there's a chance the turkey can kill the bird by just breaking your hawk's neck and things like that. So that hawk is so keen on how to kill turkey, it knows like go straight for the head. So things fight back, but if they go for something consistently like squirrel, like that bird, that hawk, that turkey killing hawk, she knows squirrels, like she's been bitten by squirrels a million times. Every time she grabs a squirrel, her foot goes straight to the face. One, because the vital spot is the head, but she's always trying to pin the jaw closed because she understands the issue that that thing could turn around and basically bite her. You'll see other younger birds don't know things like this. They go for a squirrel. That's why you got to be very quick and very astute to what's going on, because that bird grabs like the rear end of the squirrel will literally turn around and just bite that bird like really badly.
Yeah. So it's all about like, figuring out which submission you want.
Yeah. It like literally it's like
man, I'm fighting heavy guys. I better just go for rear naked chokes. I'm not getting no Kimuras off on this guy.
The position before the submission is like key, because you even see it with hawks that go for rabbits. So for example, rabbits, they'll kick. They don't really bite back, so they'll kind of thump around. But again, position before submission. You get the hawk grabbing the rear end of the rabbit. All the rabbit does is just bounce around, and like the hawk is not really ever going to kill the rabbit just squeezing onto the rear end of it. So then you start to see the hawks learning, and they start to literally climb up the bird. They start to climb up the rabbit. So like it'll grab the rear end. It'll be like, oh, this is a bad spot. It'll like foot one spot higher, one spot, and eventually it works towards the head, because it knows that it needs the most vital position to be able to actually secure the kill. Otherwise, everything it's doing is kind of pointless. I mean, in the concept of jiu-jitsu and birds, life is life and jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu. So a bird will sit on an animal in a not very good position and still eat it alive. So the bird's not like super tedious in that it'll say like, I need to perfect my position before. It will literally sit on the rear end and eat the thing alive from the back end. Don't get me wrong there, but no, there are birds that they learn like, oh, I've tried to go for this and it has adversely affected me in my not going for it this way, or not doing this or not, and they learn from that mistake and they start to work on it.
Yeah, they learn pretty quick.
Oh, they learn quickly, and especially if you are like if you're a good falconer and you're bringing your bird out consistently and you're putting them over game consistently and you have a good area, then they'll learn and they'll recognize quickly. One of the things that our Harris hawks have learned very readily is that around here we have something called squirrel drays. So if you ever look up into like the tree, like little crooks and crevices, you'll see like bundles of sticks and leaves and stuff. Doesn't like necessarily look like a bird's nest. Maybe if you were like looking quick, you may perceive it as that, but it basically just looks like a hide of sticks and leaves. Squirrels will either use that as like a hide spot for themselves or for storage for food. But if there's like a predator in the area, sometimes they'll like hide in it like a safe spot. Our Harris hawks, knowing this and learning this, have basically grown this skill set that if they see a squirrel dray, even if they don't see the squirrel go in or out of it, they'll go over to it and they'll actually pull it apart real quick. They'll step on it and they'll just jostle it around like, oh, no squirrel here, and they'll keep moving on. And so when we fly other Harris hawks that have never learned this or have never experienced like a squirrel dray, those Harris hawks see our Harris hawk do it, and then they're like, oh,
so
I know.
You let them squat up and teach each other
so
kind of thing.
That's only with Harris hawks. That's the only, unfortunately. That's the only bird of prey that you'll be able to do like a learning experience like that. Every other bird of prey, they can learn things, but they're learning it based on their own regiment and failures and things like that.
Yeah.
Like they don't have the ability to watch someone else or some other bird, for example.
Like, what are some of the smarter birds of prey like that learn stuff? Because I read this thing, or maybe I saw it on Tier Zoo. I don't know if you saw me throw that YouTube channel up in the basement the other day.
No,
but it basically was saying like some birds, what they'll do. Like one bird was like accused of like somehow getting something that was on fire and dropping it where there was animals that like were hiding and burning like the field up so it could kill the shit in there.
Yeah. So I mean, birds of prey not that intelligent. So your Harris hawks are going to be eagles, top intelligent line of intelligence, if you would. Your caracaras as well are top line of intelligence in terms of like bird of prey spectrum. Owls are actually at like the very bottom.
Really?
Yeah, the common, the misconstrued, like the wise owl, things like that. That's not true, unfortunately. Once you start getting outside of the realm of birds of prey, you start like crows and ravens. That's really where like macaws as well, but crows and ravens are really your top tier like intelligible birds. But even birds of prey, like there are vultures like the lammergeier vulture. They've adapted to, scavenge on bones that are too large for them to eat. So what they adapted and learned to do, it's kind of like a reverse tool use, is they've learned to take the bones to high altitudes and then drop them onto rock so that they shatter on the rock and that they can eat smaller bone fragments essentially, and get all that marrow rich. So it's not really like utilizing
and, like,
a tool.
They do that to like turtles and shit too, right?
Yep, they do that with turtles. As you were talking about with the eagles earlier too, they're starting to learn, like birds of prey that is, are starting to learn that if they grab something and they drag it off a cliff, chances are it'll die if it hits the ground. So anytime they like learn, again with the example of the red tails and the bats, like if they're in a specific area in a specific niche and something specifically occurs again and again, and they can kind of like map it out and they continuously become successful over it. It becomes a habit, it becomes something that they're confident in doing. If they have the confidence, then they'll just continue to do it. And,
That's crazy. It's crazy that like the birds go after things that weigh so much more than them. Like that shit blows my mind.
Yeah. I mean, if you, like, I know that I always wanted to try to get a goose. It would be cool if I had like a falcon that could go for geese. But like if you were at an area that was heavily like fitted with geese, you could, like, any bird of prey you wanted to fly, as long as you allowed, sizable wise, because there are certain things that a goose would be too big for, like a kestrel wouldn't be able to take a goose. But if you give the bird of prey enough positive success rates with going for geese, then it understands, like, in its own arsenal, it's like, every time I see this is something that I can actually acquire. This is something that if I put the energy into going for, I will actually get a reward out of. If it fails with anything enough time, one trick. So we, I explained with the squirrels, they have a common habit of biting our birds. It's something we have to be careful of. The female Harris hawk, their legs, it's bad if they get bit in a certain way, but it's, you just got to be very careful. The males Harris hawks, which are smaller than the female Harris hawks, a lot riskier. Like you don't want either to get bit, but it's a lot riskier for the males to get bit because they're that much smaller. A not so bad bite on a female could be the end of a male's like leg, if you would.
Yeah.
So one thing that you can do to kind of break the habit of like a male Harris hawk going for squirrel, you get a squirrel that gets caught. One of your hawks catches a squirrel, kills it. You put that squirrel in the freezer. It's dead, obviously. You put that squirrel in the freezer. You bring your male Harris hawk out on a day where it's hungry by itself. You go out into the field and you throw out the frozen squirrel. And the male Harris hawk will come down on it and it'll like mess around with the squirrel. You'll pull it off of the squirrel. You'll put the frozen squirrel back in your pouch. You go back into the car. You bring the hawk home. You feed it at home. You go do that 2-3 more times. Even though that squirrel is frozen and dead, the hawk doesn't understand that. All it understands is this thing that looks like this never gives me food and this never works. So now when it sees one weeks later moving around and alive, it's not going to entertain going for it because it's never worked before. It's never.
So when they're frozen, you can't eat it, right?
So the reason I say frozen is so that when the like hawk gets to it, it's going to like mess with it and like try to like if it was a fresh killed squirrel and you're trying to deter the hawk from thinking about going for it, and you threw it down and it's soft and it's malleable, well, the hawk's going to have, oh, like, look at this soft, it's going to get its mouth around it. If you throw out a frozen, like, dead squirrel, the hawk's going to hit it, and, like, it's not going to be able to sink its talons into it. When it goes to, like, bite at it, it's going to be frozen solid. It's going to be like biting a rock. Like, the hawk's going to be like, what the hell do I do with this? Like, I can't. And then you show it food instead, and, like, it's like, oh, this is edible stuff. I don't know what this is not edible. I won't go for it. So even though they see it, like, down the road, alive and moving, their past experience is such where it's like, this has never produced food. I'm not going to try.
It's crazy that squirrels give so much trouble. Like, that's, like, the thing you're watching out for.
Oh, it's, yeah. I mean, so, like, we have squirrels here, which I don't know if it's the most fun thing to go for. Out west, they do a lot of jackrabbit hunting, which the big thing for that is getting, like, your bird getting kicked. Bird grabs the jackrabbit the wrong way, and leaves itself vulnerable to getting kicked. I mean, Jiu Jitsu analogy, think about when you're going for someone's heel and they don't know how to defend, so all they do is they just boot kick you in the face. It's kind of like the same thing. The jackrabbit's like, what the hell is grabbing me? So it just boot kicks real hard, and if your bird's like face is like lingering a certain way, gets kicked in the face, you can, a kick from a jackrabbit can break the bird's neck, and and a dead bird and a jackrabbit that's hopping away.
Have you ever had, like, a hunt where, like, one of your birds died and you like had to mourn its...
No, I'm trying to think if I've ever had a bird, like, just die on me like that. I did. I
feel like that would break my heart.
Yeah.
I'd be like, Doug,
you were too young. So I always explain, like, in working with animals, especially birds, one or two things on the bad end is going to happen. They're going to fly away or they're going to die. So, in that, like, obviously, I've experienced the whole gamut of that. But I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever had anything just like, like, oh, like, here's my bird, open the box and it's dead in there. But yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm trying to think if there's, like, any cool stories or anything interesting I could tell you.
Like a fucking, like a lynx or something came out and killed one of the birds or something.
No, we did have, this is something we probably wouldn't think of necessarily. We had an issue with, the native or the neighboring raptors in the area. You always have to be careful. It's like one of the reasons all the birds along the driveway are in those chambers is because, like, if I just put a bird on a perch just in the middle of the yard, like, other birds have no problem coming in and screwing with it. And if it's like a hawk, it could do some real damage. So, like, especially if you have, like, small, like, if I have, like, a little American kestrel, you don't want to just leave that thing out, because a ground predator, an air predator, like anything, will just come around and, like, have no problem grabbing it up and killing it and things like that. I'm trying to think if we've had any, like, all of our enclosures, majority of the way they're, save some of these larger ones up here, the way they're designed is that there's a portion of the enclosure, let's say like 25% of it, where it's enclosed. There's a nest box area. There's like a roof over their head, essentially wind blocked. It's not heated in the sense that we're putting heat in there, but because they're in a wind blocked area and they themselves are able to insulate and they're endothermic, which means they're producing their own internal body temperature, they're okay, they're fine. And then on the other 75% of the chamber, it's essentially like a chain linked top, so it's exposed to the sky. Rain can come down. They obviously can't escape. But they have the ability to basically free loft and move about within that enclosure, and that gives them the ability to kind of get weathered, but then also hide and kind of stay safe and things like that. And then on the bottom end, so you have to think about a couple things, predators coming in from above, like I said, raptors in the area, but also things that burrow. So anytime we have like a perimeter, we'll dig like a trench and we'll set a little bit of fencing, at least like 4 to 6 inches into the trench, and then cover it up. So anything that wants to burrow, you feed these birds dead animals, things like that, little chick guts and everything. You're gonna have remnant parts that like lie around. Little rodents get in. It's not the end of the world, but then eventually you start attracting like raccoons and things that have hands and like digits and can kind of really mess up your bird. And so you got to be careful with things that can burrow in, things that can.
The raccoons don't get fucked up by the birds though. I'll bet it's a good fight.
Yeah, so
it's a fun one to watch.
That's what it comes down to. It's kind of like, so someone asked me this once. I have a snake at home, and I don't. It's a really weird scenario where I was doing a program and this guy came out with his son, and he was like, it was Jeffrey, whatever the kid's name was. He's like, my son Jeffrey has a question for you, and the kid's like, who would win in a fight, a snake or a bird? And I explained it would be a good fight. What would end up happening in most cases is, like unless the bird is very proficient at killing the snake, the bird comes in and grabs the snake, pierces the snake in probably a vital spot, but then the snake will also bind around the bird. So if the snake gets a good bind, it's basically choking out the bird. And you see this a lot with wildlife stuff. If you've ever seen like snakes wrapped with birds, where basically the snake is either dying or dead and in rigor mortis wrapped around the bird, and the bird is either dying, dead, or in rigor mortis and like seized up around the snake, and it's almost like a stalemate. That might not be the same case with like a raccoon, but like if you have like a very small bird in a chamber in the middle of the night, and a raccoon, which is very proficient at moving around at night, goes into that chamber, big bad bird of prey or not, sometimes catching something off guard like that can really be a make or break. So yeah, there is
them trash pandas don't play,
dude. You'd be surprised. They're ruthless. So yeah, you got to be careful. And then it's also, like in designing your own chambers. So like one thing we've try to steer clear from is having chambers that are attached to each other with a door, essentially. So like those chambers that we saw earlier, I'm pointing to.
I vaguely
I do this during the tours too when I'm like talking to people. I'm like, the chamber's over there, and they're like looking like, where the fuck is this guy pointing at? But we have like the hallways in front of the chambers that allow us to like go to each chamber, but essentially we don't want any way for one bird to get like from one chamber directly into the other chamber. So there's always like a double door system, as we call it. So like you saw, like we walked into a hallway, I closed the door behind me, and now there's a second set of doors. So in the chance that, like, let's say that the door blows open on like the owl's chamber, now all he is in the hallway. He's not out in the like free world and flying away, essentially. But that's also why we don't like to have doors between adjacent bird chambers, because if that door blows open, one bird goes into the other bird's chamber
and they fuck each other up.
Chances are that one of them is going to kill the other. There have been,
they're like territorial like that, like even if they're full, they're not like.
So I mean, I forget which center it is, somewhere crazy. They had like a picture of like a bald eagle and like a black vulture like in the same chamber, which the idea there was that both birds were rehab cases. I think they were actually both not flighted, but they were both.
So they can't fly.
Can't fly. They were both fed fat daily, which basically just meant their temperament was like at its least aggressive, if you would, like least food driven. I guess in certain cases it works. Like that is a very strange combination, like a vulture and eagle. I guess in any case though, that might be having a vulture as 50% of the aspect is probably the better chance of having something to, because like vultures are scavengers, so they're not really like. I work with a vulture at home. She can definitely be aggressive and like would mess other birds up if she wanted to. But I guess maybe that's like the somewhat of a failsafe. When she's fat, I wouldn't suggest putting birds together with each other like that. But
that's interesting. So can you talk about like what are practical uses for birds like in the real world? Like what do you get paid to do? Like when you're not doing like a cool excursion kind of thing.
So that was like one of the draws initially when I came into like falconry and everything. I was looking for something to do, with the rest of my life, make a name for myself. And I wanted to work with animals. I've always really into animals when I was younger. Still obviously am into animals. And kind of funny twist and turns to the story. I was actually always originally into snakes as a younger kid. I always used to go out in the wild and like find gardener snakes and bring them home and this, that, the other thing. So in going forward and saying like, hey, what can I do for a living? Maybe I should work with animals. I think I want to work with animals. What can I do with snakes? Everything I was reading was basically like, like start a snake collection, put it in your basement, and like get a daytime job, because like that's not going to be your daytime job. I was like, oh, that's disheartening. Like it definitely just seems to be like a hobby thing. But in looking into snakes, I remember red-tailed boas was one thing that was just like, I was looking up cool looking snakes. Red-tailed boa. Red-tailed hawk came up as like an adjacent search. And when I was a kid, when I was younger than I am now, I guess, I used to ride around my town with my buddies, and we called ourselves the Freebirds. We were this motley crew of like 8-year-olds. Actually, to this day in Central Valley, New York, if you're on Abrams Road, there's a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit sign with an FB spray painted on the back of that. That is the Freebirds territory right there. So you're in gangland. Be careful. But no, so at the time in my mind, I was like, oh, wow, it'd be really cool to have a bird for the gang. You know, like I'm joking around and everything like this. But then I started looking into it. And so I'm a licensed falconer, but that's like the base level of, you know, kind of what we're able to do, what I'm able to do, what this company kind of offers. So there were so many different realms. So falconry is, again, the sport of hunting prey with a trained bird of prey. Past that, though, now having a license that allows you to work with a bird of prey, you can do things kind of like we're doing right now, which is like an education form or display form. So I can do education, I can do displays, which is like really anything. I mean, I've had birds do different photo ops. I've had birds.
Like you go to schools and shit.
I've done school things. I've had the amount of people who have had Harry Potter birthday parties and want the owl to bring, you know, like that.
How much do you charge for the Harry Potter parties?
It's one invitation to Hogwarts. No. So you know, it's always going to be like a time, location, and what birds thing like that. That's generally what comes into the factoring of the cost and things like that. But yeah, I mean, like we've had birds that do ring bearer in the weddings, birds that have been in movies and TV shows, advertisement. Another big realm of work, which Tom Jr. actually really enjoys, is something called bird abatement, which is basically eradicating nuisance species from areas. So one popular one is getting rid of pigeon species, or pigeons, I should say, rather. So the idea is, much like a scarecrow, you know, there are certain species you don't want around, let's say, you know, in the city, if it's where we pick up a lot of our contracts. A lot of these building fronts don't want pigeons all around the building front, shitting on everything. Another spot that we've been called for this abatement work is we picked up a job through Metro North over in Croton, New York. They have a surfacing station for all the trains. And one of their main bay warehouses where they service a lot of the electrical components, which have these big bay warehouse doors. Pigeons would get in and crap on all these electrical components and destroy them. So one angle that we can do with the work that we do with these birds of prey is called abatement work, which is essentially we come in with our birds of prey, and with a method of both utilizing falconry and trapping, we're able to essentially eradicate and kind of deter the species. So, for example, I'll use one situation. We had Grand Central Terminal hired us out. So essentially what happened was they had, you know, you can imagine that the terminal itself is obviously enclosed, so there was a quote-unquote finite number of pigeons in there, but it wasn't sealed, so pigeons could kind of like free-freely get in, but there was essentially a set number of pigeons within that atrium, that main atrium of Grand Central Terminal. So for about a week we would go there with our hawks. It was honestly a bit of like a puzzle, because when we would get there, you would think,
what's the reason, I'm sorry for interrupting,
no, you're fine,
what's the reason that you chose hawks as opposed to like a different type of bird, like an eagle or
so that's a very good question. One, the reason we used the specific hawk we used Harris hawks, because we can use multiple Harris hawks at a time. So as I was explaining, these birds aren't social, they're all solitary birds. Harris hawks are social. They're the one bird of prey that you can actually fly in a cast or together, as that's what cast means. So we were able to go down to Grand Central Terminal with essentially 3 or 4 Harris hawks. You know, we could put 2 up and they kind of work together. I don't know if you've ever been in Grand Central Terminal.
No.
But the main atrium, when you walk in, it's like a cathedral ceiling. So it's like, you know, ground
huge,
floor, and you're looking up like 110 feet up into the sky. Not big enough of an area. Like if we had a very small falcon, like a kestrel or an aplomato, maybe a small enough space for it to have gone up into the air. The reason I say it was like a puzzle is because you think to yourself like, oh, you know, birds of prey kill stuff, I'm just gonna go let it go kill stuff. They need to learn how to kill stuff. They need to figure out the situation. Going into Grand Central Terminal, you know, kind of breaking it down just in terms of like a shape, if you would, it's a huge open space with nothing to land on, and the only spots to land on stuff were these like weird statues that were recessed into like the cathedral ceiling. Our hawks were too big to land on those statues, but the pigeons weren't. So basically the game we were playing was, here we are at the ground floor with 110 feet of like rise above our head, and let's say maybe not that much, maybe like 80 feet, 70 feet above our head, and airspace. So these pigeons are just flying around comfortably. If they need to land, all they have to do is go sit on a statue. Our birds instead had nowhere to land, and basically had to perceive going from a static point, climbing 70 feet, and then chasing a pigeon on the wing. which, you know, again, you think, oh, bird of prey, fly, kill. It's not like, you know, it's not that easy.
Yeah, he doesn't have anywhere to land and finish the job kind of thing.
Not even just that, you know, they can perceive striking something in the air and crashing to the ground with it. That's okay to their mind. But it's the perception of the tail chase. It's the perception of, oh, I have to climb all the way up there. Because what would happen is we would flush the, like, you know, like, so Grand Central Terminal had like 2 raised platforms and then like the lower central platform. So like I would stand here, Tom would like flash his little laser point to flush the pigeons out, but the pigeons would only, you know, from
the
like,
laser makes them freak out.
Yeah, little flashes of light, you know, because you're beaming them. They're like, what the hell is that? So the pigeon would drop down from where it was recessed in the little statue. But the thing is, even on that like raised platform, you know, I'm at 20 feet. The pigeon's at like 70 feet. So you scare it with the laser and it kind of recesses, like, you know, drops down, but it's just going to hover in that airspace all the way up there. And I'm still down here with my hawk. And even if I take my hawk and I like whip it up into the air, the hawk like has to perceive putting all that energy into the climb and then all the energy into taking the pigeon out of the air and taking it to the ground. The hawk much more would rather say, oh, there it is on the ground. Let me come from above and swoop down and slam into it on the ground. So in that specific case, it actually wasn't like an issue like, oh no, what are we going to do? It was an issue in like we had to actually think like, what the heck are we going to do? You know, how do we even the playing field?
Yeah.
So, and you know, in the interest of, you know, we're working with a company who's us going to them and saying, oh, we can't do this isn't really an option. And we were at a set time limit. So actually what we ended up started doing, and this is kind of kudos to Tom Jr. for being very good with the work he does and observant and understanding the habits of birds. It's one thing that comes really into play with bird abatement is understanding the prey species you're going for. So keep in mind, you're in Grand Central Terminal. There was no fountain in Grand Central Terminal. There's no water source in Grand Central Terminal. So these birds have to get water and food from somewhere. So one night we were there. Tom noticed that about like 3 o'clock in the morning, right? So the main atrium right underneath is like this food eatery area. There would be this fresh bread bakery delivery. There you go. That would come through at like 3 o'clock in the morning for like all the 5 o'clock like trains and stuff like that. When that little cart would come through, all the pigeons would recess down to this little eating area because little crumbs would come out. Then a Zamboni machine would come and clean the eating area. So they would linger because there would be water on the ground and they would drink the water. And that's where they were getting their water from. So one night, you know, the first night we go out, we were kind of hoping like, oh, we're going to put the hawks up, and it didn't really go as well as planned. So the second night, like I said, we were there. Tom's kind of, he's like, Jim, like, don't put any of the birds out. Let's just watch what these birds do. So he sat there and he was watching them. And again, kudos to him because he watched and he noted how they were all recessing down to the lower area. It was, you know, it's literally down to a lower, like you either walk down this ramp or there was 2 stairwells. So we talked with the grounds and all that, and we basically got this whole team together. And what we ended up doing was the second and third and fourth night, we would get there. We were doing it at night from like, I believe we started at like the last train, which was like 11:55 at night, and we had to like 4 in the morning. They basically wanted us to do it when the trains weren't going. We had a bunch of tarps set up, so we would wait for the Zamboni and the bread cart and all that to happen. The pigeons would naturally do their thing. They would go down to the lower level, and then we'd have, you know, in congruence with everyone who worked at Grand Central Terminal, we'd have all these tarps that dropped at the exit ports from the down area up to the main atrium. So now all those pigeons were stuck in that lower area. That lower area, which was the eating area, you know, 20-foot ceiling. It had all these little signs and like, you know, like a cafe thing, and like, you know, it's like a food court basically underneath. So that's where the playing field gets leveled. Now we go down there with our hawks, and our hawks are like, oh, this changes the game. Like, I can perch on literally anything I want. All these pigeons are, you know, at most 10 feet above my head, and the pigeons would, you know, go to the little corral that led back up to the main atrium, but we tarped it off. So at that point, even if our hawks couldn't get to it,
they would use a big ass tarp for that, huh?
Oh, there was like 5 different big ass tarps. It was quite the ordeal. And then there was
that's crazy. You waited for them to come down for the bread and the Zamboni situation, then threw up the tarps.
Yep.
And then threw the
man. That was a very specific. So, and maybe this is, I know Tom's very into abatement work, and maybe this is why it's because it's, you know, it's a bit of a puzzle. Like every scenario is going to be a little bit different. And there's so many different factors because, like, all our hawks were on weight, hunting capable, if we would have put a pigeon in front of them, they would have killed it instantly. But that's not the only game that's being played. The other things survive for as long as they do because, life is a game. You got to learn to live or die, basically. So, all these pigeons were just thriving there. There was nothing hunting them. There was no pressures. So we come in now, we add all those pressures. So the idea with what we did at Grand Central Terminal, at least, at a certain point, granted, again, they didn't formally close the terminal down completely so pigeons can still get in and out, but at a certain point, because of TC Management, Grand Central Terminal was completely pigeon free, utilizing the methods we did of basically both trapping and eradicating the pigeons, with the hawks.
So you would trap a couple of them and then let them go outside?
Well, so the trapping is not so much like us trapping them, it's more like when your bird exhausts the pigeon or the pigeon gets cornered, sometimes you're there with a net. There was a handful of times where I have it completely pictured in my mind, but there was a stairwell that led to this double split. It's a popular thing because I forget what it is, but basically when you go into this little, the way the architecture is designed, if you stand in one corner of the room and you whisper into it, the person in the opposite corner of the room can hear you whispering. So there's this main atrium right there that led to the upstairs area. So I would be standing there with basically a huge net, because as our hawks chased the pigeons, if the hawk didn't get the pigeon knew that little area that I was standing in led upstairs. So there was a couple times where you're like a goalie for a lacrosse team. You net the bird and now you have it. So we'd at that point take them, trap them, bring them up here, and release them up here.
So you don't leave them around town though?
No,
you gotta grab them and be like, tell your friends.
Yeah. So the idea with abatement, if you had, let's say, a farmland and money wasn't a thing, well, let's pretend that was a cool aspect. The idea with the abatement is two things are happening. Your bird is, or your birds, are both eradicating physically, they're culling, they're killing, let's say, the sparrows, but they're also just being a predatory presence. So if you were, again, a farmer and you had land and you had someone flying a falcon on your property 8 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, that falcon is going to be, the person would have to have multiple birds, but anyway, that person would be flying and killing things, yes, but also anything that was passing through the area and was like, hey, is this a safe spot? They're going to see falcons flying there, and they're going to be like, fuck that, I'm not staying there, I got to go somewhere else. So you cull kind of the initial population, and then anything else that tries to come in anew basically does not see it or perceive it as a safe spot. There are other methods of abatement with just trapping. So we have some contracts now down in the city where basically there's just humane traps set up. So every couple days Tom will go down, fresh food, fresh water to the trap, anything that's there, he takes it, he brings it away from basically New York City, and just consistently eradicates it that way. That's for trapping methods where maybe utilizing a falcon or a hawk or something isn't going to be allotted. Some companies don't like the pigeons but also don't want the bloodshed, so you kind of have to meet them halfway. But trapping methods are another accessible way of kind of eradicating the species. But no, just the consistent predatory presence is going to be a big thing in deterring pigeons, or it really depends on the scenario you're dealing with.
Yeah. Tell the story that you told the other day in the basement where one of them got a pigeon and he ate it.
Oh, yeah.
And why you don't like him eating pigeons and stuff.
Yeah. So a couple things. So we talk about weight and how key the weight is. It was this job for Metro North over in Croton, New York. We were flying. We flew 2 times during the day. We would fly at 8 to 10 in the morning. We'd fly at 8 to 10 at night.
And this was an abatement job.
Yeah, this was an abatement job. So basically, it was this big bay warehouse thing. It had these 2 sets of railroad tracks that would come in, and any of the Metro North trains that needed servicing would basically be railed in. The bay doors would open up. They would come in. They'd close up, and they could service them. It was basically the rails were on a hydraulic lift, so it can do all these fancy things. The whole. The whole property had a bunch of different bay warehouses, but this one specifically dealt with all the electrical components. So they hired us out to specifically abate in this one. So one day we're there, we're doing our abatement thing, and our bird is flying around, and pigeons carry a lot of diseases. They're actually a very dirty animal. So even if our bird catches one and kills one, we 100% intervene and, you know, here's chick, you know, you did right, you get fed up, but we're taking the pigeon away from you because we just don't want them to get sick from it. There is something called pigeon herpes. Our birds can get that.
That's crazy.
So
dirty bird.
Yeah, dirty birds. So we try not to let our pigeon or our birds eat pigeon. I do remember though this specific one time at this facility over in Croton, New York. Our birds are flying around. Our hawk slams this pigeon on the top of like this I-beam, like 60 feet up. And so, you know, what's the big deal? The big deal is it's going to eat that pigeon, which is bad enough, but it's going to eat that pigeon and now it's going to be full. It's going to be full and it's not going to give a shit about what you have in your hand. It's not going to care that you have to go.
That his name is Doug.
He does not care that your name is Doug. He's going to say, Doug, I swear I'll give you twice as much food. And he's going to say, I don't care anymore, Jim. So that's the issue with that. Yeah, so, you know, I'm sitting there and basically, you know, the second he hit that pigeon on top of that I-beam, we ran around and we're like, listen, we need a scissor lift like right now. They're like, well, okay, you know, like we got you. It'll be here in 2 hours. We're like, no, like, we need it like right now. Like you just see like feather after feather just falling off from behind the I-beam and you're like, oh my God. Like, it's gonna happen. And we're trying to fight for it. And so they had this like, eventually basically what ends up happening is the bird, Scary, decides, okay, I'm done eating. She comes to the edge of the I-beam, and I was explaining before, the crop. So you can't really see like a bird is fat or not, but you'll know if they just eaten, because if they've literally just eaten, their crop will be super engorged, right? So she comes like to the edge of this I-beam and she's just got like a freaking like softball sized mound in her chest. And I'm just like looking at it. I'm like, oh. And one of the workers was like, so what happens now? And I'm like, literally nothing. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, the bird will not come down. He's like, you can't call it? Like, Doug does not. Nope.
He doesn't care that his name is Doug.
And he was like, so, like, the guy's like, you know, everyone's always does this always happen to you? Like, no, this doesn't always happen. Like, this is just, the bird ate the other bird and now it doesn't want to come down. He's like, is it never going to come down? It's like, no. So the idea is, the reason we weigh the birds is, again, the number that we're, you know, the working weight, if you would, is what the bird is responding to. If a bird just ate an entire pigeon, it is no longer at that working weight. It is well above that working weight. And, you know, you can get a bird, so you like say, well, can you, is it like a done deal once you feed the bird? No, like I can put a bird into a tree, call it down, give it a little food, put it back, give it a little food, you know, and go back and forth. Eventually, though, you start teetering the line where, it doesn't really want the food anymore. In this case, the bird just ate a freaking pigeon. The thing was like, I can't remember exactly, but I think we were there for a good 7-8 hours, and that bird literally did nothing. It just was like, I'm just going to hang out here. Eventually, what we ended up doing was, the way the building was structured was there's this large like crane that was able to like slide across, and it was for like lifting different components of the trains and stuff like that. And it had this little like catwalk on it. So I got onto that. They like pushed me all the way over, and I was basically like right across from the I-beam that the bird was standing on, and I just stood there with the food. Doing this for like fucking 6 hours.
What is this?
Like the chick in my hand. So like if you're trying to entice the bird, you like take a chick and you kind of like just shake it in your hand,
move it, yeah.
And you'll hide it and you'll shake it and you kind of like tease the bird with it, and you'll like be able to pick up on how interested the bird is, because sometimes they'll like, oh shit, he's got food, like I want that. This bird was just like,
I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, like
dude.
What? Did you say Doug? I'm not Doug. So yeah, so we literally just sat there, and like that's the thing. So
So like, let me ask you this, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the chick, right?
Yeah.
They come to your wrist.
Yeah.
But like once they eat it, they don't just fly away and say fuck off. Like,
So
I
when we so the birds have, you know, they have the 2 legs. We'll put anklets, which are what go around the legs of the bird. But then from the anklets, jesses will come down. So those are 2 like pieces of rope, it's leather generally, that we're able to secure and hold on to. So that allows us to secure the bird.
Like once it lands, you just grab those.
Yeah. So with most birds, like because you've manned them and they're calm, you know, they come to the fist and you're able to like kind of comfortably come up, grab them, hold them, and like everything's okay.
Yeah, they know what's going on.
Certain birds, like I think I was explaining before, that Scary, that bird that killed the turkey, she's not very good for our education programs because she hates dealing with people. Like, she's a great hunter. She'll go out, she'll kill stuff. But, like, you know, in handling her and stuff, she gets very finicky and flighty. So, like, you know, and we always deal with her. Like, when you get her, you call her to the fist, you grab those jesses, and you don't let go. Because, like, she gets one little piece of food, and she goes up in a tree, and she gets like, screw you guys. Like, I don't want to hang out. And, like, so certain birds can kind of have, like, weird temperaments like that. But 99% of the time, as long as you have the weight on point, you won't have an issue.
That's so funny. The birds are introverts. Like, nah, I want to be away.
They just want to have their food and that's it. So like, you know, even with like a squirrel, like if the bird kills the squirrel and you're not worried about it getting bit, you still don't want to just leave the squirrel there, because what'll happen is the bird will eat as much as it needs and then it'll just jump into a tree, and now you're like, well, the bird's not going to come down to you because it just ate an entire squirrel, and now you're stuck waiting underneath a tree for a good amount of time for that bird to process the food.
And then like it knows you though, right? Like, so if you have the food, it'll come down to you.
Yeah, so that's another like speciation thing. So like we have like the Harris Hawks. They're really good in that they're social, because with like the programs we do, I'll fly Harris Hawks with the people, and like I'll give like each person a glove and a piece of food, and like the Harris Hawk will come down to everybody even though they've never met them. Not all species are like that. Like some birds are a lot more finicky, and it really like it kind of just honestly really depends on what type of bird it is and like how it's been worked. Like the Harris Hawks, they consistently do stuff with random faces, so to that extent they're even more kind of absorbed into that, like whoever it is, I don't care as long as they have food. Some of the birds, like we have an owl, Boogie, I know I'm pointing to a direction. He would be like, he would come to like me and two other people, be maybe finicky with a couple, like he would be finicky with random people, but there's maybe like a couple collective people like in his like wallet that he's like, I'm okay with like A, B, and C, but anybody else, like I'm not. So it kind of really depends. Basically the idea is the more stimulus and the more things you can introduce the bird to and get them acclimated to in that process of getting called to and food and blah blah blah, the more willing and readily they'll do it for people or things or in front of somebody or something like that. Like, you know, if we stood back here on a very calm day and you called a hawk and it came, you're like, all right, cool, perfect. You tried to replicate that on like a busy street, there are birds that will do that. Like in the middle of hellfire, they'll fly and have no problem, but you have to get the bird acclimated to that. You know, you could have a bird that like, oh, I swear he came to the fist every single day. Like, I don't get it. And all of a sudden you bring him to a park and the bird's like, screw this, man. There's way too many people here. Like, I don't like this anymore. And then you realize like, oh, I got to introduce him, you know, like, or I got to man him around people more, things like that.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to bring out Boogie?
Yeah. You want to meet Boogie?
Yeah, I want to meet Boogie. We'll be right back. So we're back, and Boogie's joining us now.
So yeah, this is Boogie, the Eurasian eagle owl. Boogie's, man, he's done some crazy work in his day. So owls are not really the most popular bird utilized for hunting. The reason being is that they are an ambush predator. So his main game is basically to sit, be quiet, wait, and when something doesn't notice that he's there in the tree, he'll swoop down and he'll grab it. That works great for owls, but me being an individual who's trying to work falconry into his day-to-day activity, I don't really have 8 hours to sit in the middle of the woods waiting for Boogie to just go grab a rat and then eat it. So instead, Boogie was kind of utilized for education. Owls are generally imprinted and worked with in terms of education and kind of display forms such that to kind of inform the world about conservation and different, you know, things about birds of prey. And they have a temperament that allows them, as you can tell, to be very calm around people and just kind of very readily accessible in that asset. And so give Boogie a little push here.
That's crazy. Oh man.
You know, it's kind of misconstrued that it's basically just feet and body for the owls. They do have very long legs. It almost looks like his knees are going backwards. That's actually not the knee. The knee is actually located all the way up here. Yep, so up here is the knee, femur goes back here, and the pelvis is actually all the way back here where his tail feathers are essentially starting. And then, you know, the radius and ulna and the humerus are all located in here. Like
Thick tail feathers. They're like really thick.
Yeah, so you can see, you know, all these feathers that are showing here are called flight feathers. He's like, oh, yeah, doesn't want to show them. You get your tail feathers, and then your deck feathers will be your two central feathers on the tail. Then you got your wing feathers, your secondary and your primaries, and then your coverts are basically your cover feathers. So owls are really interesting in that, you know, with all these birds of prey, you know, 10, 20 feet above your head, if they're flying, you're really not going to hear them. But owls specifically have the ability to actually emit no noise when they're flying. Unfortunately, I don't think the camera will be able to see it, but if you look right here, you can see all that serration on like the leading edge of the feathers. It's not like a clean line, it's all serrated. That acts much like a wind diffuser on the end of a microphone. So as he flies through, his feathers diffuse the sound essentially, and basically he emits no noise whatsoever.
Yeah, Google that. Google a picture of that. Yo, so these are the ropes that you're holding,
Yeah,
right?
so what we have going on here is we've got anklets that attach to his ankles.
And those are just like leather. They look like they'd be pretty comfortable.
Yeah, they're leather. So the idea is, it's going to be consistently around his leg. You always want to make sure that it's loose enough to move around, and always check every once in a while. Make sure no sores or anything are forming underneath. If let's say it moves around freely, but all of a sudden your bird like mutes or craps, defecates one day, and it catches it, sometimes they can start to get a little affixed, and if you're not careful and you're not paying attention and it stays affixed too long, it can start to congeal to the skin and it can get really nasty if you're not careful.
Yeah.
So keeping them fresh and loose is good, but yeah, it's just pliable leather. Then we have these things called...
So how do they fasten on?
It's a metal grommet.
Oh, so you put it on and then you take the grommet
You grommet
okay,
pliers and you clamp it together. And then these are jesses. These jesses are made out of like a cording like this. You could also make them out of leather, like the anklets are made out of.
Yeah.
And then this is just like a leash. So this is like an added secure. If I were flying a bird, I would not have the leash on. I would have only the jesses, and they would not have slits in them. See how this has a slit in them?
Mm-hmm.
You'd fly the bird with slitless jesses. The idea being you want to be able to maintain your bird when you're flying in the wild. So like if I'm hawking out with my red tail, I want to be able to...
At me.
I want to be able to hold the jesses and control the bird. But if the bird were to ever get away and or is just flying, you don't want the jesses to have slits, because then this could assumably like snag on a tree or something, and then the bird can get hung up and things of that nature. So you fly the bird with equipment that allows for it to be not hung up essentially. Or
So do owls normally sleep during the day?
It depends on the species. So we're always kind of taught that like all owls are nocturnal. That's not true. Most common, if you look at the eyes, it'll kind of tell you the lighter the color of the eye, normally the lighter the habit. So like the more diurnal, the darker the color of the eye, generally the darker the habit, so they're more nocturnal. Along with, you'll get for darker eyes, a more pronounced facial disc. So if you think of something like a barred owl, they have those big sonar discs on their face.
Yeah.
So all birds of prey, like vision is their number one sensory. When you come down to owls, or when it gets down to owls, you have two senses that are really utilized, vision and hearing. So now when the owl becomes more nocturnal in its habits, those facial discs become more pronounced. The reason being those facial discs are utilized for sound acquisition. So basically the owl will face its face towards whatever. The sound is reverberating off of that, hits the face, gets sent from the feather line to the ear. The owls have asymmetrical ears, so one's lower, one's higher. The lower one's angled up, the higher one's angled down, and it's basically able to acquire sound. Have you ever seen like those owl videos where they kind of do that little head shift thing? It's basically him just triangulating on sound.
And they can turn their head all the way around. Is that a thing?
So he can go about 270 degrees.
Jesus.
So like on a visual plane, he can cover 360, no problem. But if I took his head and like cranked it 360, it would break.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is, so like if...
Oh shit.
Yeah, look at me do it. But the reason he can do all that,
he's a good camera bird.
Oh yeah. That's why he's the most popular.
Yeah, man. He's a professional, dude.
The reason he has so much...
It's crazy. He's like thinking like, oh, I'm hunting that later.
So I'm gonna get that leaf. Take that leaf home. The reason they have so much mobility in the neck is because, like, if we're looking at each other and I told you to look at the house without moving your head, you can do that. You can look at every direction. He can't. His eyes are fixed within his skull. So if he wants to look to the right or do that, he has to physically turn his head that direction. He has a very shallow peripheral view.
Yo. That thing's cool. Dude, that thing's big. Like,
yeah.
It's so weird to see like an animal that big that's not a cat or a dog or something.
So if you had to guess how much he weighed, I know you're not holding him, but
like he can't weigh more than like 5 pounds, right?
No, you're pretty good at this.
Yeah, I mean, but like basically what you were describing the other bird before.
Yeah, no, you're actually right. He's about 4.5 pounds. It's just people are funny. Sometimes you put like, I've put, we have smaller owls, 2 pounds at most, and I put it on people's fist and like 14 pounds, and I'm like, you need to go buy sugar or something in quantity, like go lift some weights or something.
Yeah, for real.
But yeah, so like Boogie's only about 4.5 pounds. That steppe eagle you saw earlier was probably 8 pounds. It's probably the heaviest bird and largest bird we have on the property.
That's the one over here.
That was that brown one that came out of the dog kennel and was like talking to you.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's, the heaviest flying bird is the Cory bustard. It gets like 25, 30 pounds. I believe my ornithology teacher in college told me it was the muted swan, but I think that's debated. I don't know. Don't quote me on any of that. But yeah, so they don't get very big, especially him. If you look like,
yeah, because like the feathers take up most of the space. Right?
100%.
And
yeah,
it's like how much does a feather weigh?
Feathers, owls especially are a lot more feather covered than anything. And then all these birds of prey, feather structure, hollow bone structure. They're very lightweight. They're very aerodynamic in every kind of way and form.
You ever? Oh man. So he hates dogs.
Boogie doesn't like dogs or garbage cans, actually.
Or garbage cans.
Yeah, I don't know why he doesn't like the latter, but
what the fuck? That's crazy.
Yeah, he's not too big a fan. That's actually my fault. So when I was raising and imprinting Boogie, I at the time did not actually have a dog. My dog had passed away. So for that first good year where it's kind of crucial for him to be
around
stimulated.
He's gonna be around,
exactly. So he lacked a little bit of dog. I mean, the dog goes around these other birds, and you'll see the birds kind of look at them weird. So even with the birds being introduced to them, they don't necessarily like the dogs. But yeah, there is definitely a notable difference between a bird that's been exposed to dogs being around the area and.
So he's fluffing up. He's pissed right now.
Yeah, he sees it probably through the reflection.
He's like, Jaime, what the fuck, man? You said there wouldn't be any dogs.
Yeah, he said dog. So.
Damn, dude. Majestic ass bird. But yeah, you ever have I was saying, you ever ask somebody what's heavier, a pound of bricks or a pound of feathers?
Yeah.
Dude, I've had some experiences with some really unintelligent people.
It's always funny too, because I always want to get into how I always make the bit to people where I'm like, oh yeah, people sometimes put birds on their hand and they say it's 14 pounds, and I always get the chuckle from people oh haha, that's so funny. But then I always get the groups where before I can even actually make that joke, I put the bird on someone's hand and they are that person, and they're like, oh, this has to weigh 15 pounds. I'm like, are you serious? So I haven't even made the joke about people like you who say that.
Yeah.
That's bird is not 15 pounds.
He's pissed right now.
Yeah, you see. He's got those little ear tufts.
I like it. I fuck with it. It's interesting. So the funniest thing I think I've ever gotten, when I read someone was memeing someone on Tinder or something. He was like, what's heavier, a pound of bricks than a pound of feathers? And then he was like, well, if you think about it, if you add the weight of picking all those feathers out of those birds on your conscience, I would say the pound of feathers weighs more. Shit's crazy. But that's fucking crazy, dude. That's crazy how big the silhouette is, versus how much the actual
I mean, when
he
when he gets wet, when it rains, and you think about that wet dog look, the ironically wet dog look. It's funny because he literally looks emaciated. He gets so skinny. There's so much specifically for owls. With the other birds of prey, the feather line is very taut to the muscle lines. So kind of what you see is what you get. With the owls, that's far from the case. There's so much more feather cover to them, especially even down to the end of the toes.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet, man. Yeah, man, the eyes are huge too.
Yeah, so again, fixed within the skull, and they're actually so large that if you were to cross section his skull, his eyes are basically almost touching. There's a finite paper thin line between them. So 80% of his skull cavity is basically just eyeballs.
Are owls pretty smart? You were saying they were pretty dumb.
No,
actually,
dumb.
yeah. So you were saying you would need 8 hours at night to get him to train him. But do people do that? Are there owlers?
So you wouldn't necessarily need to sit. Again, if I wanted to let him do naturally how he would hunt, I would be sitting there for a while, and he would have to get really quiet and make sure nothing's looking at him, etc., etc. There are people who stand by hunting with Eurasian eagle owls because they think it's just for one thing, if you're gonna waste the time, take the time to try to get an owl to hunt, this one is the species really to do it with because it's size for size. It's the thing that's going to be the most
eagle
appropriate.
Owl, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what he is.
Big feet, big bird, takes sizable game. There are people though who hunt with them who like stand by saying that they are, once you get they're a simple-minded animal, but like once you get them set on what they need to do, they're very good and they kind of can keep the routine very readily. So in that regard, they aren't the best, but there are people out there who definitely do. He's panting, so he's like a dog. He can't sweat.
Yeah. So he's just flicking the tongue around in there. You got him mad heated too by letting the dog come out.
Yeah. But you'll see. But like that's another reason he'll also like kind of fluff up all the feathers just to let air out. So feathers are insulators, but that's insulate to let in and out. So
Yo, I could just stare at him for like a long time. He's an interesting guy. What do owls hunt like that's different than other birds of prey? Like things that are coming out at night. Like I always see like in the documentaries, it's like mice and rodents.
Yeah,
and shit.
it's kind of really it. They don't have as much, I guess, if you want to say, like as varied a diet as other birds of prey would. Even your bigger owls are generally just going for your small rodent and vermin creatures.
Oh, he hates that dog, dude.
Lola's like 14 years old, probably couldn't hurt him if she tried. He's like, I don't trust it. I don't know what it is, but I don't trust it.
So how do you pick the names?
So it's funny. Boogie, so names are irrelevant. It's a little bit of the cold-hearted part. I guess I don't really.
Doug.
Yeah, I was say Doug. Yeah. I don't really at this point go too far in trying to name them. Boogie actually acquired his name from a buddy of mine when I had first gotten Boogie and I was working with him and rearing him and imprinting him. Boogie, that is, was at my house, and my buddy, like I forget what it was, didn't have his car or something. So I went to go pick him up. And in doing so, like I got to his house, and then I started talking to him, and we lost track of time. And finally, he like sat up, and he was like, "All right, listen, let's go see Boogie. Let's get some lunch." And I was like, "Who the hell is Boogie?" He's like, "I just named your owl. Like you're taking too long for us to leave. Like that's kind of how Boogie got his name. It's just something random, but it stuck. Like everyone likes Boogie as a name. I don't know.
It's a good name.
Boogie
man.
the owl.
So how what's the life expectancy on like the different like what's like a hawk versus a falcon versus an owl? Like, who lasts the longest?
I would say unlike dogs, in the bird of prey world, the larger the bird, the longer the life expectancy.
Nice.
So big bird owl like this, 35, 40 years.
Get out of town.
Same thing with like a large eagle.
And you raised this guy? This is your guy?
So he was bred by the Cullens, and then they were nice enough to let me imprint him, basically.
So how old is he?
He's 6 years old now.
Is he going to grow much bigger than that?
So 10 weeks, they're full grown.
Get the hell out of here.
So like after, Boogie was an egg, and then 10 weeks later, he was this.
That's
more or less,
crazy.
some feathering came in. But yeah, that's basically what ended up happening. And that's birds of prey across the board. So whether you're looking at like a little American kestrel, a bald eagle, Boogie, all of that's happening at about 10 weeks, from hatch to about 10 weeks old.
That's epic.
It's very, very fast. I mean, the amount of food you feed a little baby, the amount of food you feed like a full-grown bird and a little baby, you're feeding the little babies pretty much almost every hour, and they're consuming like what a big bird would eat almost every day, like every hour essentially, and just the rate of growth is just exponential.
Yo. He's so... I don't know, man. I'm just like mesmerized by this guy right now.
Yeah, no,
It's so weird. Like, I like animals in general. Like, I'm a fan of nature, and I just never been this like close to something like this. I've never been close to a bird of prey, like an owl, like this. Master of the night.
Yeah, no, and it's fun too because with the owls they can see at night. So when you go into the chamber, like with other birds, they can kind of see at night, but a lot of times when you go into a chamber with a bird at night, they hear something and they're just kind of like, what the fuck is going on?
Out,
yeah.
Man.
Boogie, you go in the chamber in the middle of the night. He's like, "Yep, I see you.
Man?
Yeah, what are you doing right now?
Yeah.
Yep, what are you trying to do?"
So what's like the smallest bird of prey too? Like you were saying with the life expectancy, I'm trying to think.
So I don't know if you can really see it, but right through that window in that black cage, there's an eastern screech owl. It's like this big. Like
oh damn!
8 years old.
This is how long they last.
Yeah.
Damn.
Anything in captivity, the life expectancy is obviously longer because you're alleviating the stressors that the wild would put on the bird. But
Yeah. And then you have you don't have any peregrine falcons? Isn't that the ones they use for like airports?
Yeah. So. Yeah, we do have peregrine falcons here. You don't need to use them for like abatement at airfields. But flying, anytime you need to like fly in an open air space, a falcon is a popular bird to use. So like if I took a falcon and I threw it at a tree right now, like it wouldn't land in the tree. It would avoid the tree and it would go into the air. And if it were to fly off and like want to land, I would look essentially for like rooftops because it's gonna want to land essentially like on a rooftop or like a flat cliff-like top surface.
Why?
It's just the way it's designed. It's so each bird is kind of designed differently. So like falcons are more designed for a cliff dwelling, to be high altitude, stoop off, be able to stoop down on prey, return to the cliff, make scrapes on the cliff. Hawks make certain hawks make nest in trees. Some are also cliff dwelling birds. So it kind of depends on like what species you're working with. But just in the way they fly, like if I was going somewhere where I had to have a bird like move along with me progressively, like tree to tree, or like let's say it's a weird walkway that has like a stump every 10 feet, like a hawk would be a good bird because it'll progress with each stump. A falcon would just go up into the air and fly in a circle and wait for me to serve it something. So if I was like in an open airfield and ducks were flying everywhere and stuff like that, a falcon would be more ideal, kind of, because I put the falcon up into the open airfield, and then they scare the ducks up, and then it's all fair game at that point. It doesn't matter that there's no perched surface that the hawk wants to sit on and wait for. The falcon just utilizes its vantage point from the air and that stooping motion to kind of get the kill.
Yeah. Does this guy go after like or like what's like the barn owl? That's that thing. Like, do they go after like barn swallows and shit? Like, do owls commonly hunt other birds?
Not commonly. They're not too designed for it. They're more of a rodentary fur taking owl, an animal, if you would. When you start to see like designs for like bird hunting birds, you see very long, like lanky toes, longer, lankier wings, legs rather. The wings can kind of vary, but generally they tend to point to being like a rounder, broader, so they have like a more dexterous maneuverability. Or like the falcons, they're very knife-like, so that they can basically pierce together and like kind of shoot down in that very aerodynamic shape. And again, along with lanky toes and legs, so that they can grab things out of the air. Anytime you see like a very thick short toe, it's generally pointing to it like in going for ground quarry, where it can like go to the ground, a lot of pressure to the shorter end of the toe, grab things, such like that.
Nice. So does it categorize as a bird of prey if it's an animal that like attacks like fish and stuff? Because there's a lot of birds that like attack fish and stuff in the ocean.
Birds of prey.
I watch a lot of these nature documentaries.
Oh yeah, no, I love nature.
I'm just thinking about that stuff.
So birds of prey are defined by the fact they utilize their feet to acquire their prey. There are things like osprey go for fish, they're a bird of prey. Bald eagles go for fish, they're a bird of prey. There's other fish eagles, birds of prey. But the feet thing is the delineation. So I kind of actually use that as an example with other groups. I always say like penguins. Like first thing I always get is a bird of prey is defined by the fact that it eats meat. That's not true. Like that's the first misconception. Like penguins, what do? They eat fish. That's meat. They're not a bird of prey. So to your effect, it's hunting things, but it's not a bird of prey. It's going for fish, but it's not utilizing its feet. So it's not a bird of prey. So basically, the fact that it eats food or hunts doesn't make it a bird of prey. It's literally the fact that it utilizes its feet.
Or it like has talons.
Yeah, essentially.
Interesting.
Because like even the vulture, like she doesn't like vultures are scavengers, but I've seen my vulture like when she eats. If she grabs like let's say a piece of tendon that's like very like sinewy and like connected, she'll pull at it, and if she can't tear it with her beak, she'll take her foot and she'll actually like swat at the meat, and it'll slice the meat in half, and then she'll be able to chew it. So even like vultures that don't necessarily like grip and bind things, they'll still utilize their feet in order to like sever meat and things like that.
That's interesting. So they're that sharp, like they're bladed almost on
the end of the talon, like
Oh yeah.
I was gonna say, but even vultures knowing the habit, like if he took his foot and just went like that real quick, it'll cut you. And so the vulture knows that. Like if she's pulling on this piece of meat, she swats her talon across it. She knows it'll cut if it's sharp enough, the meat's soft enough, etc.
Nice. Let me hold that bird.
Yeah, you want to? We're probably gonna have to stand up, maybe.
Right.
Are we gonna be? Alright, so
The camera can probably see from here.
you want to keep two things comfortable. You want to keep
Yeah.
yourself comfortable. You want to keep the bird comfortable.
For sure.
So to keep yourself comfortable, a lot of times people with handling a bird, they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna put my arm out here. This is gonna destroy your shoulder, elbow to your ribs. This will make you the most comfortable. This gives you the most strength to this part of your arm.
Yeah.
Now, when you're holding the bird to keep the bird comfortable, you're the branch essentially. So you want to keep your your wrist to your elbow in a straight line.
Yeah.
A lot of times, we're not used to having like a weighted thing at the end of our hand, so we start like dropping our hand.
Yeah.
He's gonna climb if you do that. So just keep everything up. You'll be okay.
Yeah. All right.
That's the crash course.
So you're just.
Yep.
That's the thing.
Bring your elbow in,
All right.
and then I'll do this.
Oh shit. Yeah. Holding an hour. This is the first for me.
One, two, and with a little more tight fist.
You just pop my chair.
And then, so it's a common thing. Like as you're looking at the bird.
It does like feel like it weighs more than 5 pounds.
Yeah, he was only. I'm trying to think the actual number.
It's
like
probably like
20
just
2,200 grams this morning.
like where the weight's distributed.
Yeah, at the end of the hand. And so a lot of times people like look at the hand. He'll always compensate for you. So what people tend to do is they like have the bird there, and they think he's like slipping off the back end, so they start like turning their hand.
Yeah.
You don't need to do that. Like if you rotate it forwards or backwards, he's gonna step accordingly. He's either gonna step forward or he's gonna step backwards.
Yeah.
So he'll account for that for you. Here, you want to sit down and try something.
I kind of do. Oh man. I look like a nerd. Is this cool, like to kind of have him like in front of me like this, or rested on my knee?
I'll sit here, and if anything happens, I'll dispatch him. Dispatch.
Cool. Yo, Boogie, let me ask you a question, dog. Oh man.
And he looks at you.
It's interesting. Like, I kind of want to just get a look at the talons really quick.
Turn your hat backwards.
I'm gonna do that. Good suggestion. Can I touch the feathers and stuff? Or is he gonna get weird? If I just like...
You're okay.
Yeah, man, the back feathers are so like dense.
Yeah. So,
Interesting.
all the feathers are essentially kind of like designed the same way. You see they have that like central vein.
Yeah.
And then they have these extra little veins. So you see how like it looks like a wall, but then I'm like pulling it apart.
It's crazy how densely populated it is.
So if I
on
put
those
this
feathers.
under a microscope, all these little strands would have something called barbules on them. It's like Velcro. So you see, like when I pull this together, see how it cleans itself up and it like reattaches. With the barbules, what's happening is it's connecting all the feathers so that all these flight feathers, which have more barbules on them, can stay kinetic like that, so that when they pass through the wind, they stay connected. It traps the wind. Any feather on the body that's for insulation is the same thing. Like if you look at this, you see it's got that central vein, and it's got all these extra little veins that are coming off. The difference though is if I put this one under a microscope, this secondary veins don't have as many barbules. See how they don't connect and they don't make as like taut looking a feather. They're a lot more open and wispy, and then as you dive even deeper, same thing. Like all these feathers, they're the same design, one central shaft and the veins that come off of it, but they're not as connected because they lack barbules. That allows for air and basically the insulation to occur.
Neat.
Yeah, Boogie's a cool one.
Yo, he's a good dude.
Yeah,
I like him. He's not giving me any like crazy.
No, he's good.
pressure.
It's funny. Years ago, when I was working with Boogie, I was in my room and I had to like type something. I don't even remember what I was doing, but I took him and I was like, whatever. And I like put him on my thigh and I like took my glove off and I started typing. And then someone came to my door and like knocked. And he was like, what the fuck was that? And he squeezed down into my thighs. And I just remember like I couldn't pull him off because every time I went to go pull him, he just sunk tighter into my thighs. And like, standing up wasn't an option because every time I tried to like even like sit up in my seat, he just tightened. I literally had to just sit there and like, okay, this really sucks, and not do anything. And eventually he just like slowly let go and loosened up more and more and more. And eventually I was able to get him up.
Did you have like puncture wounds?
So that's the worst part about getting grabbed by a bird. They just make holes, basically. That's it. Like
Oh,
you don't get
man.
like cool battle wounds or anything. I have like a
Yeah.
little scar somewhere on my face from where my vulture bit me, but no, they don't really.
They be biting you?
Yeah, the vulture does. That's what everyone always asks. So, like, you ever worried about getting bit? No, the birds of prey again are defined by the fact that they use their feet. The vulture is the one bird that I would say it's like 50-50. You probably should wear glasses so you can keep your eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's quick to throw the beak. She gets me in the chest all the time. It's so annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I like no lie. Like I'll just like you see how Boogie's calm. She'll be the same way, calm, nonchalant, and all of a sudden she'll literally like, turn around and just like rip my chest. Some bitch, like bleed instantly because she's like got literally a beak that's razor sharp and made to cut into like animal hide.
Yeah. Well, she's trying to eat you.
Oh,
She's
in that
hungry? She's trying to
case,
kill
I think
you?
she's just
Shit.
you're
Is
okay.
your dog? No, I
It-
didn't
it's
know.
in the window.
All right.
In that case, she's just biting me. But I do remember distinctly at one point I was doing something with her and she bit me and it started bleeding and it bled down and like hit the asphalt and she literally walked over to it and like lapped it off the asphalt. I was
That's
like,
crazy.
I'm like, damn, yo, if I died in front of you, you would eat me 100%.
Yo, for real.
It's like, now I need to
no
know.
sympathy.
Yeah, if I need to fucking off myself, I'll do it in her chamber and I'll just let her kill the remains.
Oh shit! It's like don't let anything
Yeah,
go to waste.
yeah, right.
That's crazy.
His body was never found again.
Yo, for real. Well, they say like you gotta what's the thing the mob does? They take pigs.
Oh yeah,
You know what I mean? You're supposed to
feed
feed you're supposed to cover a dead body in honey and then feed it to the pigs.
Yeah.
Shit's crazy.
Just do it with vultures. Next time on how to hide a dead body.
Yo, for real.
You can touch his toes if you want.
I don't know.
He's got another cool one. If you feel, go like that on the inside of the edge.
Oh,
Feel that, and,
interesting.
take your nail and like you can like kind of delve into there. So that's called a blood groove. So like it's kind of common weird knowledge that like if you get impaled by something, you leave it in there and you seek medical attention because it'll clot. You know, like it being in there is clotting the area. So you imagine birds of prey have 8 stabbing implements. So when they grab something, it yes adversely affects the animal because they're piercing the skin, but you're not necessarily bleeding the animal out because the talons are clotting it. So that blood groove, which is also something that we've adapted to like bayonets and stuff, basically allows air to enter the system, forcing and expelling whatever's inside the system out, which would be blood. So the middle talon on owls and birds of prey as a whole had that.
So it's
groove.
just this guy. Just
Middle
this
talon
one.
of both feet.
Interesting. Do you want to let him chill here?
Yeah, here, let me take them from you for a second.
All right.
Spin your arm out this way.
Oh yeah. Yo, Boogie, I'm a big fan, man.
And open your hand.
So you said DJ Khaled was used one of these guys in a music video or something?
Yeah, so there's a Falconer or he works with exotic
That's
animals.
crazy. So he just knows to just walk back, or you're exploiting like an instinctive thing.
Kind of, yeah. So that's what I was kind of explaining before with like it's a bit of a mechanical thing. You know, like when I bump his heels onto something, he thinks, oh, step up. You know, like what is this? Step onto it. So I'm kind of working that. But you do have birds that are like, no, fuck you, I'm not stepping onto this thing. So he does it nicely. He's a good bird. Hanging out with Boogie.
I'm just looking at your knot. That's pretty cool, man.
Falconer's not. It's you're able to tie it with one hand essentially.
Oh. Yo, look at him getting mad at the existence of that dog. That's crazy. Yeah, man. So like tell me a little bit about like the company and like about TC Management. You know
TC Management.
Yeah.
So I mean, you really should. I guess Tom would be the better person.
Yeah,
to talk to.
I'll definitely dive into it with him, but I just we'll let me get like some semblance of a plug.
Yeah. So as I was kind of saying before, Tom Senior, when he was about 9 years old, he saw this old movie, Rusty and My Falcon. Boy goes out, traps a bird from the wild, takes it home, raises it. So at that point, he basically became enamored with birds of prey. You know, a little bit politically incorrect in that they don't want you just like going out and trapping a bird of prey and being like, oh yeah, this is what I do, you know. But you know, in that he kind of spent the rest of his life, he's still alive now, but you know, doing different stints all around the world, working with birds of prey. Eventually he settled down here in Goshen, New York, and started a family, son and daughter. Tom Jr. is the son, who basically continued in his father's footsteps of doing falconry, but also kind of intertwining all aspects of birds of prey and working with them between propagation, which is the breeding, which is a big part of conservation, as well as, like I expressed, Tommy is really into the abatement work. So, you know, TC...
Are there any of these that you have here endangered species at all?
I'm trying to think. So... No, I don't think so. Not endangered. There may be low numbers on some of them. But you know, the idea is there's kind of two fronts we're able to work on when you deal with like captive breeding. So you know, we have exotic. We're a very large exotic breeding collection. So you know, what are the benefits of breeding, you know, a bunch of boogies in New York State? There's two things. There's one thing where, you know, if we're all interested in working with Eurasian eagle owls and we all want to give these really good talks about, you know, protect the wild, Eurasian eagle owls, and then ourselves go out and trap Eurasian eagle owls from the wild and hurt the, you know, like it's counterintuitive. It's like we give this whole talk and then all we do is, you know, rape the wild of the population that they have.
Is it more common for falconers to buy birds or to catch them?
Well, this is where kind of, you know, this kind of depends where, you know, like you go with the vernacular. So like as a falconer, generally, or more so 100%, when you start off as an apprentice falconer in New York State, you can either have a red tail or a kestrel. Those are the only two birds you're allowed to have. You have to trap it from the wild.
As a beginner?
Yes. So your first year, so it goes apprentice, general, master falconer. Your apprenticeship is for 2 years, and then they reevaluate you.
Damn, it's like a whole
Jiu
Jitsu structure there.
Yeah. So, and then you also have to have a bird on the license for at least a year. So those birds, technically, I believe you're allowed to, like, if you knew someone was producing red tails, you can go and utilize a red tail that was like chamber reared or, you know, let's say produced on a property and not from the wild. But generally, you're told, like, you know, go trap from the wild for your first experience, and then move forward. So it kind of depends, like, what bird you're going to be working with past that point. Some people like working with native, like, red tails, because what they'll do is they'll trap the red tail in September, they'll hunt with it throughout the entire winter, and then they'll release it in the migration, and then, you know, they're off for a couple months, they'll trap another red tail, and they'll just do that, and they just have one bird, and they'll recycle it again and again. Some people, you know, oh, I want an eagle that doesn't exist around here, so they'll buy it instead, and they'll hunt with it that way, and that's how they'll go about it. I might go move him inside in a second, though, because he's getting a...
Yeah, that's cool, man. I'm surprised he didn't poop at all since he's been out here.
It's funny, yeah. I was making all those comments about how he poops all the time, and
yeah, but that's cool, man. We could probably wrap it up. We've been going at it for a couple hours. Is any shout outs or plugs you want to drop before we close it?
Well, I mean, you know, it sounds ironic, but big shout out to the Cullens. You know, we didn't really talk about this, but when I got my apprenticeship, you know, the way it basically happened was I took my test, I passed my test, and then the state sent me a packet, and it said, here's all the names of people in New York State who can sponsor your apprenticeship.
Oh, so you had to, like, reach out.
I had to just go and talk to them. So, you know, the Cullens really didn't ask for Jim. The Cullens just kind of got him knocking at their doorstep. And I make a joke to all the groups when I do these programs that, you know, like, I hung around so much that the Cullens eventually just kind of put me to work. But the fact of the matter is they've been extremely hospitable with offering their time and all the things they have going here.
Yeah, I mean, even right now, like, we're on their property using this space to shoot the podcast, so I'm really grateful that they were able to let you do that, too.
And, I mean, it's a big thing, because when I initially approached the whole idea and concept of doing falconry and being a falconer, it was specifically for the purpose of getting closer with animals and permanently working with them. And having followed the methods of going for a falconer's license and so on and so forth, I would have not necessarily been put in the position to do something like that. What the Cullens have going on here on this property is very special and very different from what a normal falconer would be doing. So, you know, in the fact that I was looking for something to kind of do with my life for the rest of my life, and the fact that they were willing to let me, kind of linger around and kind of, backpack off of what they already had been doing. I'm extremely grateful for that to begin with. And, again, like you said, we're here on this property, and literally all this is possible because of them. I'm a good studier. I study things well, if you would, however you want to phrase that formally. But, you can only study so much without a teacher, so if it wasn't for the Cullens, I really wouldn't be able to say half the stuff or know half the information I've given today,
Yeah.
So
no, that's incredible. And you definitely have a wealth of knowledge. So I'm also grateful that, I've been given the ability to have access to your bright mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right, man. I think that we can call it on that.
Cool.
Make sure you guys go and follow him. He's got Instagram and then TC Management. I'll drop some links for them in the description if you want to have some birds come out to your school or something.
Yeah. We do anywhere, anytime. Just let us know and we'll make it work.
Yeah, if any Harry Potter fans.
Yeah, any Harry Potter fans, we have owls.
Yeah, Boogie's pretty nice.
Dropping that new mixtape, we also have owls.
Yeah, man, he's a pretty nice guy. I think he can drop your letter to Hogwarts.
Yeah, right.
All right.
All right, everyone. Have a great day.